Police officers have always gotten a bad rap for their authority over us, which is very often abused. However, the police are the first ones to get called into action whenever trouble arises, and they'll no doubt see some disturbing stuff. Here are 4 haunting stories of former police officers. Number 4. I was a cop for 30 years. I retired at the age of 50, so of course I had some weird calls. But I'll never forget the night that me and my partner Steve were called to respond to a domestic abuse report. The call was made by a neighbor. These calls were never really a big deal. It usually gave us something to do during the night. Not that I enjoyed dealing with couples fighting and all that stuff. So we arrived at the house. I still vividly remember the address, and I remember the door was left wide open. The second we stepped inside, the strong scent of marijuana filled our lungs. It was everywhere. Not just marijuana though. There was the strong smell of chemicals, which we assumed was either meth or cocaine. We made our presence known by asking for the couple to come out into sight. A thump from the upstairs gave away their position. Steve had his hand on his holster, ready to pull his gun. But me? I wasn't nervous yet. Steve told me to move quietly up the stairs. We normally listen to each other, so I humored his paranoia. There were 3 doors, 2 open and 1 closed. The closed door led in the direction where the thud in the ceiling was. I banged on the door before swinging it open myself. The smell was the first thing we noticed, then the body. The body was very obviously rotted. We knew even in the dark. We pulled our guns. Steve turned on the light. I told him to scan that room while I scanned the rest of the house. I was shaking all over now. I hated my job at that moment. I wanted to run back to the car and leave, for I was sure I could die at any moment. I found my hand to be stuck on the doorknob until I finally had the balls to turn it and push the door open with force. I turned the light on, but there was nobody inside. It was a disturbingly tiny room. No windows and no furniture, except for a dirty old cot. Steve suddenly screamed, and I rushed across the hall to see what was going on. There was some shirtless guy laying flat above one of the dressers in the room. We had him at gunpoint, yelling at him to come down, when something grabbed my ankle and tried to pull me to the floor. There was a hand coming from under the bed. I stomped on the arm with my other foot and pulled out a frail, trashy-looking woman who was obviously baked. I cuffed her and Steve cuffed the man. We were on our way outside with the 2 crazies screaming at us, but we had one final surprise coming. Some psycho from upstairs started screaming, charging at us down the stairs with a knife raised in the air. Steve reacted just fast enough to save my ass by 2 seconds, shooting the guy dead. This was a crack house. Somehow none of the neighbors could smell anything suspicious. The dead woman on the bed was killed by the man of the 2 we caught, who admitted to killing her due to lack of payment. The man was sentenced to life without parole. The woman was sentenced to 30 years. Steve says he never felt bad about what he did. He says he just rid the world of one more piece of trash. Number 3. Myself and a buddy on my squad responded to an alarm. The incident location was an old office-type building that had been converted to a doctor's office. There was a pharmacy attached to it as well. Our dispatch received a motion signal from an upstairs office. The key holder arrives on the scene and we go in to secure the building. The stairs were locked behind a door that, of course, the key holder didn't have a key to, so we took the elevator up to the 2nd floor. The elevator opens to a pitch-black hallway, except for one overhead light at the end of the hall. We start checking the doors, and so far, all are secured. We get to the last office, and sure enough, the door is unlocked. We make entry and observe it to be an unused office. The door opened to a sizable waiting room and reception area. There were about 10 or 12 exam rooms, all cleared with no hiccups. We exit the office, and immediately, something seems off. That's when I realized the overhead light at our end of the hallway that was on before had been turned off. It was replaced by another light over at the elevators. I look at my squad mate and he's completely white. I ask him what's wrong, and he says, "Weren't all those doors we just checked closed and locked?" I tell him, "Yeah, so?" My buddy says, "Well, now they're all standing open." Sure enough, all the offices down the hallway we had just checked were now standing open. The pucker factor sinks in at this point, so we start clearing and securing offices. We finish the last office, and on our way out, just before we turn the corner to get into the waiting area, the main door just slams shut. Then our radios start going nuts with some kind of static feedback. Now I just want to get the hell out of there. We get back in the elevator and head down to the first floor in hopes to make contact with the key holder again. However, the key holder is nowhere to be found. I contact dispatch and request a callback number for the key holder so I can advise him of what we found. Dispatch states that the key holder was still en route to us and was advising an ETA of 5 minutes. I advised dispatch that we had already been out with the key holder. Dispatch requests I give them a call. I call dispatch, and she tells me that there is no way we were out with the key holder. She states that the alarm company had only just made contact with one. Eventually, the real key holder arrives on the scene, and I ask her about the man that had let us in the building. She asked me to describe him, so I did. She states that sounds like one of the doctors that used to lease the office on the second floor at the end of the hall. She then states that he had committed suicide at his summer home several days ago. Number 2. I was responding to a call in the village. A resident was reporting noises coming from one of the abandoned buildings from across the street, most likely trespassing. I arrived and began my search in the building. It used to be a 2-story convenience store. Now it was completely stripped empty, except for the parts attached to the floor, like the counter and shelves. The lights didn't work in there either. I checked every small aisle for anyone to possibly be hiding in, and then I did the same thing upstairs. It was completely empty. On my way back into my car, I looked back at the building and saw somebody at the window on the second floor. It was a woman with long gray hair down past her shoulders. She was no doubt looking down at me with a wide smile on her face. I hurried back inside, making it upstairs in no more than 10 seconds, but the window was clear. There was nobody in sight. I checked all 3 aisles at least 10 times. I checked behind the counter, I checked the bathroom. It was clear. I was a little nervous, so I left again, thinking my mind was fooling me. I looked back at the window, and there she was again. The same mockingly disturbing smile on her face. I went back up there again, this time running around all 3 aisles trying to find this woman. I was about to give it up once more and leave for good when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. It was on the ceiling. A dark shade of black latched onto the ceiling. I shined my light up there, and there she was. That crazed woman looked at me, still with a horrifying smile on her face as she held onto 2 hook-like objects in the ceiling with her hands, while her feet were pushed up against the tile to gain support. She laughed like a freak all the way down to the station. I don't know if she had some kind of mental disability or not. It seemed like she was just toying with me, but not at all in a good way. She stared me down through the mirror the whole ride. Number 1. In all my years of being a police officer in Floyd County, Georgia, I had only experienced 2 horrifying situations. I'll share with you the worst of the 2. It was a slow night, and I was patrolling the dirt roads in my cruiser. At this particular spot, there were tiny woods on both sides of the road. And then it all started. I spotted somebody jumping into the woods on the left. I only saw half of them though. They were gone so quickly. I pulled up closer and shined the spotlight into the woods. I didn't see them. Unfortunately, it was kind of my job to check on things like this, so I hesitantly stepped out from the car and began searching. In a moment like this, I was so ready to pull my gun, as I was actually terrified. And then, the cliched snap of a branch from behind a tree almost made me want to run back to the car, but I instead did my job and called for them to come out. Someone wearing a mask stepped out from the tree. I told them to raise their arms, take off their mask, and come to me slowly. They raised their hands, but they didn't remove the mask. I tried to demonstrate my authority by yelling this time, ordering them to take it off. They looked as if they were about to take it off, when suddenly, he or she looked to their left, and then back at me. I heard footsteps coming from my right. I drew my gun. I yelled as loud as I could for everybody to come out with their hands up. You may be thinking, why? Well, if you were in this position, in this setting, you would have been shitting yourself just like I was. Another person wearing a mask walked over, this one holding an axe. I had my gun locked on him. But suddenly, footsteps started coming from all directions. I looked around, and I was surrounded. There were at least 10 strangers wearing masks, surrounding me almost in a circle, with only an opening behind me. Half of them were armed with axes and the like. I stood there, gun raised, but not even aimed at anything at this point. I felt like I was going to throw up. One of them, I'm not sure which, finally broke the silence, telling me in a muffled, deep voice, "Go away." My heart dropped as he said this, in a way that I knew I was going to live. I turned and ran for the car, driving down the road half a mile, all while calling for backup. As you would guess, the whole group was gone from the woods when a search squad arrived. I have a theory on this, however. I believe that what I witnessed was some kind of fucked up secret society that was planning on trapping an innocent passerby, and I think that whoever jumped into the woods as I was passing recognized my car as a police car and tried to hide. Had I not been a police officer, I believe they would have stopped me, led me to the woods, and done whatever this group does for its sick kicks.
When I was 22, I got a job in New York City. Living in Jersey, however, there was no way I'd be able to do that commute daily, so moving was a necessity. Only thing, I didn't have a lot of money yet, so when I saw an ad on Craigslist for an available bedroom in an apartment in the Hell's Kitchen area for a really low price, I jumped on it. I took a ride to the city the next day to view the apartment, and the landlord gave me a quick tour of the place. The landlord himself seemed a bit socially awkward, but that didn't really matter at all. The place did come with a catch. I'd have a roommate. The landlord said he's a very quiet, to himself kind of person, which he said was good. My roommate's name would be Bren. The landlord knocked on Bren's door, asking if he'd like to come out and say hello. Bren didn't even answer. The landlord suggested he might be taking a nap. So we moved on to talking in the living room, where I said I was interested in renting. I signed an application, and the next day, the landlord called and offered me the room. So I moved in the next week. My dad helped me unload all my furniture into my little room. Something odd to note was that never once did this Bren character come out during all this commotion to at least say hi. He was definitely home. We heard him moving around in his room. I came to the early realization that he probably wasn't going to be friendly at all. When we finished unloading the van, my dad left and I was alone, officially moved out. I sat in my bed and started watching Netflix on my laptop. Then I heard the door to Bren's room open and close. This seemed like my chance to go out and say hi. It was his first time leaving his room. I got out of my bed, but before I could even get to my bedroom door, the front door to the apartment slammed shut. I stepped outside to the living room, and no one was there. I didn't know what the deal with this Bren guy was, but surely he had to know we'd have to meet eventually. I went back to my room, ate a bowl of ramen, and went to sleep. I woke up when I heard the front door to the apartment close again. Then footsteps followed. The footsteps on the creaky wood floor made their way to the outside of my door, then stopped. I sat up and looked at the crack below the door. The outlines of feet could be seen through the light creeping in under the door. Why was he just standing out there like a creep? Of course I didn't say anything, I just waited for him to walk away. I didn't have my door locked, and I was low-key terrified of him entering my room. But thankfully, he walked away from my door and back to his room, and I heard him shut his door. I tried to go to sleep, but all night all I heard were thumps coming from his room. I had no idea what he could possibly be doing. I was tempted to go knock on his door and tell him to keep it down, but I hadn't even met the guy yet, so I had to deal with it. Eventually I fell asleep, and when I woke up in the morning, it seemed Bren was out already, maybe at work, I didn't know at the time. I spent most of that day shopping for groceries and basic apartment necessities. When I got back, I dropped all the bags on the couch in the living room to give myself a rest. I cooked dinner, watched some Netflix on the couch. All the while, Bren never came home. I did a quick run to the nearby 7-Eleven to get toothpaste, and when I got back, I noticed Bren's door was cracked open and the light was on. So I figured this was it, the moment for me to say hello. I went to his door, knocked lightly twice, then pushed the door open. What I found in there was shocking, or maybe I should say what I didn't find in there. The room was completely empty. Not a single piece of furniture, except for a single chair sitting in the corner of the room, a kind of chair you'd find in a high school classroom. My heart suddenly started racing and I started to shake. I turned off the light in that room and shut the door. Could this Bren person have been in the process of moving out? I went to my room, locked the door, and sat on my bed, suddenly getting a really bad headache. I took out my phone and decided to call the landlord to ask him what the hell was going on. After dialing his number, I put the phone to my ear and suddenly heard a loud ringing sound coming from my closet. I felt like my heart, which was already racing, was now in my stomach. The phone rang twice, then went to voicemail. I got out from the bed, ready to open the closet, but I stopped and realized that given that the phone rang twice, that means he had his phone and he declined the call. I had the sick realization that the landlord was likely in my closet, and there never even was a Bren. I ran to the bathroom, locked myself in, and called the cops. They got to the apartment shortly and searched the whole apartment with me. Sure enough, we found the landlord hiding under my bed. I tried pressing charges for trespassing, trying to get myself out of the lease, but it turned out there never even was a lease. The dude wasn't even an actual landlord. He didn't even own the apartment. I didn't get the rest of the story, like how he got the keys in the first place. I had my dad come the next day to help me move all my stuff back home. I found another apartment the next week, and it was a huge hassle going through the whole moving process again. I knew from the start the so-called landlord gave off bad vibes, but who would have ever imagined the events that were about to take place? There was an ad on Zillow for a shared apartment near the chicken farm I worked at. I moved in because it was convenient and already furnished. I just dropped off my clothes and a mini dresser, and I already had a bed to sleep in the spare room. The man who was renting the room out to me was old. He was like 70 or something, and his name was Ben. It was a non-contractual agreement, meaning I'd pay him by the week, but he was more or less still a roommate. He was very old-fashioned, and that included everything in the house. I've never exactly come from a wealthy family, so trust me when I say this was a steal for me. One night after getting home from a long day of work, I collapsed into bed and fell asleep like a baby. But suddenly, I awoke to the bedroom door opening. Light poured into the room from the hallway, and standing in the doorway was the old man, Ben, with his hand on the doorknob. He said in his deep, hoarse voice, "Stay out of the basement." He said he knew I went down there. I defended myself and assured him I didn't, because I actually didn't. He shut the door, and I heard him walk downstairs. I sat there thinking this guy must be unstable or something. The next day, I was off from work. Ben took his old jalopy down the road. I'm guessing to the store. While I was alone, I stared at the basement door. I knew it was the basement door because I'd seen him go down there before. I went to open it just to peek downstairs, but obviously it was pitch black down there. I would have never been compelled to go down there if it weren't for his bizarre remark about not going down there. but I figured he wasn't going to be home anytime soon, so I continued down. I found the light switch at the bottom step for some reason. It was for the most part a normal basement so far, but there was a door in the corner. Behind that door was something unimaginable. The door was very hard to open because there was some rubber concealer under the door, I'm guessing to keep that awful smell out of the rest of the basement and house. The inside of this little room was a nightmare. Bloodstains on the concrete floor, black bags stacked in the corner of the room, stretched long enough to be carrying bodies or body parts. And the smell of rotting life. I had to refrain from puking right there. I noticed a camera hung in the top right corner of the room, aimed down at some workbench. I took a quick picture of the room and hurried out of there. I went up to the spare bedroom, packed all of my clothes in a garbage bag, and heard the front door slam shut downstairs. He was back. I played it cool and greeted him from the upstairs hallway. He didn't respond. I heard him open the basement door and stomp downstairs. I saw that as my cue to sprint to my car. I made it to my car and without looking back, drove away from there. I drove 15 miles back to my brother's farm and showed him the picture. He said I was an idiot for not calling the sheriff sooner. So I called 911 and told them to bring a search warrant to Ben's address and check the basement before he could clear it out. I made it clear I was simply his temporary roommate or tenant living with him and came across it. A few hours later, someone from the sheriff's department came to my brother's farm asking for my ID and some other information. I complied with them. They gave me the relieving news that Ben had been arrested. He was in the process of clearing any evidence from his basement, but he wasn't quick enough. The deputies didn't go into much detail about what exactly they found in those bags or anything else, but I don't think they were allowed to. They thanked me and went on their way. My brother let me stay with him for a few weeks till I was ready to get back out there and find another apartment. I'm not sure how many of you went to college, but for those of you who did, you most likely remember that feeling of walking into your dorm for the first time, meeting your roommate, the person you're supposed to ideally be friends with for the next 4 years. I certainly remember mine. I walked into my dorm for the first time, and there was my roommate. He had fair skin, black hair, glasses, and a slightly feminine tone in his voice. There was nothing wrong with any of that, but to me, he just immediately struck me as the gaming type, which was not exactly someone who I was going to vibe with easily. From the moment I shook his hand and he gave me a dead fish handshake, I was a little put off. I'll call him John for the purpose of this story. I left the room to go say hi to the other kids on the floor and meet as many people as possible. I instantly vibed with some of the other kids more than I did with John. Anyway, that first night consisted of a lot of unpacking and hanging around in the room. So I did try to get to know John a little bit. It wasn't that he was a mean person, it was just he didn't seem to really know how to converse. I would ask him questions about himself, and he'd give me one-word responses, or responses that barely even made sense. He even went to bed really early, shutting off his lamp at like 10 o'clock. No one had classes the next day, so I just found it odd. I put headphones in and watched videos on my phone until around 12. Then I went to sleep. The next morning, a few of the guys on my floor and I went to the dining hall together. When I got back to my room, I noticed my duffel bag was moved. I looked at John, who was sitting on his bed, then went to go through my bag to see if anything was missing. I couldn't find what it was, but my bag just seemed lighter. I straight up accused John of going through my bag, and he denied it with a very aggressive tone. What could I do though? I didn't have cameras in the room, so I couldn't prove it. The next night, I tried inviting John out with me and a couple of the other kids from the floor. He didn't want to go, claiming he was trying to stay on top of his work as soon as possible. So I went out, and when I got back, John was fast asleep. It was kind of late, so I just went straight to bed too. It started to rain pretty heavy outside. A storm was in the forecast. I woke up in the middle of the night hearing thunder crashing. I was too comfortable and lazy to roll over and look outside, but even with my eyes closed, I was noticing the constant flashing from the lightning. If anything, it actually helped put me back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, and my backpack was open and moved. I didn't accuse John this time. I decided I was going to stay up that night and wait, listen to what he was doing. So, after a long rainy day, night came, as did the time for me to hit the hay. I stayed on my phone for a long time, listening to the rain outside the window. Around 1 or 2 a.m., I flipped on my side and pretended to be asleep. I did this for a long time, and eventually I started noticing the flashes again. 2 or 3, actually. I turned to my other side and saw John sitting upright in his bed. I only caught a glimpse of him quickly putting down his arms as I flipped over. Suddenly all those flashes made sense. It wasn't lightning, it was him taking pictures of me. I played dumb and said, "What are you doing?" He stuttered and said he couldn't sleep. The next day I told the other kids on the floor about it and how weird John was overall. They said I should request a room change. I agreed with them. At whatever point I went back to the room, John was actually gone for once. I couldn't believe it. His laptop was also on his bed with the lid cracked open. I had to snoop. I was too curious. I opened the laptop, and I was on John's desktop, which was littered full of folders, programs, and images. It was the messiest desktop I've ever seen. I started opening the random pictures on his desktop. Most of them were weird, but then I got to the disturbing ones. Pictures of me. Upon opening one of them, I realized it was a picture of me in bed, taken with an iPhone with the flash. He had stored all the pictures he'd taken of me on his computer. He even had pictures of my duffel bag and the inside of my backpack. I took a video of the laptop screen, then deleted every picture I could find from his computer and closed his laptop. I went straight to the hall that dealt with dorm life and showed them the video. I requested a new roommate immediately. I don't know how John was disciplined by the school, but I was going to be given a new room across campus the next day. However, on my last night with John, I couldn't sleep at all. I heard the springs under his mattress kinking as he got up from his bed at some odd hour in the night. Then silence. Silence until I heard a short, quiet exhale come from right above my bed. He was standing over my bed, I just knew it. But I was just simply too afraid to turn around. Less than a minute later, I heard the springs under his mattress again, and the rest of the night was silence. I was out first thing in the morning. My new roommate was like a breath of fresh air, a normal guy. It's a little creepy knowing that John Kid still has all those pictures of me sleeping on his phone. I don't know what his goal with those pictures were. I don't know why he just stood over my bed like that the last night I was there. I don't know why he went through my bags. The kid was an insane creep, and I'm happy I got away from him. When I moved out from home, my dad's friend Kathy was subletting her apartment with 2 bedrooms. She said she'd give me a good deal, however I'd have to share it with some older woman she found. She was tight on money, so I understood. Kathy introduced the woman and I the day I moved in. Her name was Betty. She was like 60 years old. It felt weird knowing I'd have a roommate who could almost be my grandma. Since Kathy was subletting the apartment, it already had furniture. I just had to bring my own bed and dresser. The weirdness started on the second night. I was watching TV in the living room when Betty's head appeared from behind the wall to the hallway, and she stared at me intently. She started muttering these strange, faint noises. "Betty, you okay?" I asked. She groaned and disappeared back into the hallway. I immediately got on the phone with Kathy and asked if there was something wrong with Betty. Kathy said there was nothing wrong with her as far as she knew, though she only met her a week ago. When I told her about what Kathy just did, she was surprised. The next day I ran into Kathy cooking eggs in the kitchen. She said good morning, and I asked her if she was okay last night. She seemed confused what I was referring to, and I mentioned the way she was staring at me and making those noises. She claimed she had no recollection of it. All I could chalk it up to in my head was some kind of psychotic break. Fast forwarding through normal, unnecessary fluff, I was laying in my bed on my laptop with the light off. There was a knock at my bedroom door. I muted my laptop and heard the same moaning and groaning sounds of Betty from the night before. Quite frankly, I was uncomfortable with going out there, but this confirmed that something was definitely wrong with this woman. She kept knocking. It wouldn't stop. But the door was unlocked. If something was really wrong, I figured she'd come in. I really think the knocking and moaning went on for a full minute before I heard her walk away. It seemed these little episodes of hers would only happen at night. I almost wanted to be able to lock the door because it was kind of creepy actually, but the door had no lock. But she left, so I was okay to go to sleep now. I woke up expecting it to be like 9 a.m., but it was pitch black. I looked at my clock and it was 1:30 a.m. What I was woken up by became clear when there was a creak in the floor in the room. I saw a figure standing at the edge of my bed in the dark. "Becky?" I said. I heard the familiar groaning sounds again. I flipped on the lamp next to my bed, and there she was. This 60-something-year-old woman, with her long graying hair all disheveled, looking like a half-awake psycho. But really, the first thing I noticed was the large knife in her hand. I screamed a horrific scream as I curled up in the corner of my bed, expecting her to attack or do something. But she just kept making her strange sounds. Then she left the room. I ran to shut the door and block it with the dresser. I tried calling Kathy, but she was obviously asleep. I had to make it through the night, and it was a long 6 hours before the sun came up. I called Kathy at 8 and explained everything, and then I told her she needed to evict Betty immediately. She couldn't believe it, but she still apologized and said she'd be over that day. Kathy came to speak to Betty. She couldn't just evict her right away without a notice though, and the eviction process takes months. So Kathy told me it was best if I just left the apartment and found somewhere else to live while she dealt with Betty. Betty apologized and said she had no recollection of any of this stuff happening. After Kathy and I did some research, we determined Betty most likely had a severe case of sundowning syndrome, which causes people to become confused or aggressive late in the day when the sun goes down. It's really terrifying knowing in whatever confused state of mind she was in, she likely had the intention of coming into my room and stabbing me for whatever reason.
Number 4. This happened during a Boy Scout campout when I was 15. My friend who was supposed to share the tent with me called out from the trip at the last minute, so that meant I had to pitch the tent and sleep in it alone. The sun was going down, and after a long day of hiking, we got back to camp to set up our tents. It was already dark at that point, and I was still trying to set it up. It wasn't as easy doing it yourself. Someone came over and finally helped me, and then we ate dinner. After the cliched telling of scary stories around the campfire, we all went to sleep. I guess I was a little happy that I had my own tent at that point, since I had more room. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of somebody stomping around my tent. I immediately assumed it was another scout going to take a leak or something. You may be thinking that all our tents were pitched right next to each other, but our scoutmasters actually had us pitch our tents far apart, so I was pretty far from my closest scoutmates. The stomping around the tent seemed to just be going around in a circle, so at that point, I was sure somebody was messing with me. I asked who it was, and in response to that, they stomped off into the woods. I almost found myself going out and following them, but I figured it wasn't worth it, and just tried to fall back asleep. But after that, it was hard to. Sure enough, the stomping came back, and started circling the tent again. I was pissed off now, so I got up and unzipped the door to the tent. I was expecting to see another scout, but when I confronted the person making the noise, instead I saw a grown man, probably 6'5", in his mid-30s. My heart was racing and I couldn't even gather up the courage to scream. The man gave me a creepy smile, and then brought his finger to his lips, signaling for me to be quiet. I did a quick 180 and sprinted to my Scoutmaster's tent, screaming like a baby. He ran out before I even reached the tent, and I told him about the man I saw. He and the other Scoutmaster ran over to my tent with one of the hunting rifles, but they didn't find the man. They did, however, pick up on the tracks the man left walking around the tent. We were all told to bring our tents closer together, like literally right on top of each other. The trip was cut short the next day and we all went home. I have never gone camping since, and I never will again. Number 3. So me and a couple of my buddies went camping last summer alongside the Willamette River. We actually had a decent hike into the deep end of woods. We did some night fishing, listening to music, and basically drank to the point where everything was funny later in the night. I would guess we finally called it a night somewhere past 2 a.m. I shared a tent with one of my buds while the other two shared another tent. We heard them laughing about something. At first we laughed at the sound of their laughing, but it soon got annoying and we yelled for them to shut up. One of them responded, "It isn't us." I sat up, startled at the response. I came to realize that it was the sound of only one person laughing, and it didn't sound like either one of my friends. Even in my drunk state, I realized how odd it was for somebody to be out this far in the woods so late at night. The laughing gradually got closer and louder to our campout. My friend shot up and looked at me with a worried look on his face. I heard my other friends scream over to us that they were getting freaked out. As the laughing got even closer, I could make it out very clearly to be the laugh of a male, probably in his 30s or 40s. He sounded like he was as drunk as us, messing around with friends, but we only heard his laugh, nobody else. There was something indescribably creepy about his laugh too, as if it was missing something to it. You had to be there to understand what I mean. The laughing was now just at the edge of our campsite. But we couldn't hear any footsteps at all. Now that may not seem like a big deal. It was impossible to move through that without making noise. And finally, all of a sudden, the laughing stopped completely. We had no idea where whoever that was standing, as he hadn't made a single stepping sound. We sat there in silence looking at each other. My friend was clearly freaking out, but he was keeping it together the best he could. Finally, something broke the silence. The sound of something rubbing against the cottony fabric of the tent. We saw the outline of a hand through the moonlight, pressing on the tent. We both screamed at the top of our lungs before getting out of the tent. We ran as fast as we could through the woods, our other friends following us. After about 5 minutes of running, we somehow found our car. I actually puked from running so much before taking the wheel. I don't condone drinking and driving, but I still believe we were just in this situation. By far the most horrific experience of my life. No idea who or what the hell that was, or what they wanted. Number 2. After college, I went backpacking in the Canadian wilderness for a few weeks by myself. To put this in perspective, I was in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was a 3-hour bus ride away, and I only saw one other person, who was from a distance. He was in a canoe, during the entire 7 days. I brought a few disposable cameras with me, as this was before digital cameras were too widespread. I took a lot of pictures. When I got home, I had them developed and took a look at them. The pictures were standard nature shots, until I got about halfway through my first camera. There were 2 pictures of me asleep in my tent in my sleeping bag. I literally freaked out when I saw it, and I had a complete breakdown. To this day, I have no idea how those pictures got taken. I haven't been camping since, and I sleep with my door open and my curtains shut, and I still get the paranoid feeling that whoever took those pictures is still watching me somehow. Number 1. My boyfriend and I decided to go out to the gorge for some quality time camping. We had always gone with several other people, but this was the first time it was just us two. When we got out of our car to prep our gear for the mile hike back to the camping spot, 2 sketchy looking dudes came out of the trailhead, eyed us, and went back onto their old school Volkswagen camper van. I had a weird feeling but shrugged it off and proceeded back to our camping spot. I had previously camped in the same area a handful of times, and I knew it pretty well. Once we got back there, I knew of a handful of different camping spots, and proceeded to check them all out for the one that would be ideal for us. I noticed what looked like someone camping further up the hill, so I picked a spot a little further down where we'd most likely be out of sight. Not out of earshot though, as I heard him yelling with someone else back over on the trail. It was starting to get dark by the time we got everything set up, so I figured I'd start looking for firewood. Suddenly, this guy appears out of nowhere and asks us if we'd like any help, and offered to sell us a bundle of firewood for $10. I laughed because we were in the woods, thus surrounded by wood, which I could pick up off the ground for free. He then said that I wouldn't find much because they'd already cleared it out over the past few weeks. Few weeks? I asked him how long he'd been camping up there, and he said almost a month. I already had the creeps about him, and he claimed he was up there by himself. I asked him why I heard him yelling with someone then, and that he had referred to more people when he was talking about the wood. He stammered and was like, yeah, there's some dudes I know camping over there but up on the other side of the river. Then he proceeds to tell us that he's been lonely since he arrived. He was from Pennsylvania, took a bus to Lexington, and had been living in the woods back behind where I currently work. I knew exactly where he was talking about because I saw some homeless people, immigrants, and drug addicts coming in and out of those woods every day. So basically he was a homeless man who somehow got a ride out to the gorge and decided he would just live there instead. He had been living on snakes, bugs, and selling firewood for money. But he said we were the first people he'd seen in a few weeks. His stories were all over the place, and I knew he was lying about a lot of what he told us. He wasn't alone even if he claimed to be. He even took us to his camp where there were tons of stuff for several guys, not just one. He said he liked camping up top where he could see everything, and everyone. Then showed up our campsite. He had a straight shot view. By now it was dark and he helped us get a fire going. I was trying to politely get him on his way back up the hill so I could have a minute to process all of this. When he left, I started whispering to my boyfriend that there was no way in hell I could sleep with that lying, sketchy homeless creep right up the hill. We didn't have a gun, knife, or even a dog to protect ourselves if we needed to. My boyfriend somehow convinced me to stay a little longer, so we planned to stay the night. But all throughout the night, we heard twigs and branches snapping around our tarp, as if somebody was watching us. It was that man. I knew it was. He was standing out there, watching us. I said let's quietly get our shit together and get the hell out of there. Which we did, only we left our new tarp set up because they would make too much noise and he'd know we were leaving. As soon as I stood up with my pack, ready to get the hell out of there, he yells, "Leaving so soon?" We proceeded to get away from there as quickly as possible. The most disturbing thing, as we were getting away from there, the man yelled for us to come back. That only made us go even faster. In my mind, we were either getting robbed, raped, killed, or something, because he was not alone. His stories didn't add up, and his background of where he came from made me believe he was running from something and was trying to hide by living off the grid. I called the Rangers the next morning and told them about him. Luckily, all he got from us was a set of new tarps. I'm currently a freshman in college. I came home this past week for a funeral, but let's backtrack a little. My senior year in high school, I was in the library during study hall doing some computer science work on the computer since my laptop at home didn't have JCreator on it. Anyways, this boy who was in my class sat next to me since those two computers were the only ones with JCreator. He was a really tall, very pale boy. He had long black hair that covered one of his eyes. He wore an anti-flag tee, ripped jean jacket, and Doc Martens. He never spoke to anyone in class, and I'd never seen him with anyone else. So I took a seat, and he looked up at me like I committed murder. I quickly looked away and started rummaging through my bag as a distraction. As my head was down, I heard him chuckle and then mumble, Of course. I froze with my head still down towards my bag. I just dismissed it as him talking to his computer, as code can be quite frustrating. I sat back up and quickly typed in my login details. To break the awkwardness, I said, "She assigns too much homework, I can barely keep up." His eyes stayed locked on the computer screen. "You want the answers, don't you?" I laughed and said, "No thanks, I won't learn anything that way." Usually I would have said yes, but I didn't want to see his evil stare again. It was like he was staring into my soul. He laughed again, in that creepy laugh. So creepy that I had to close my eyes and cringe. I opened them and looked over to see him gone. The strange thing was, he left his flash drive. I waited about 10 minutes to see if he would come back, but he didn't. Study hall ended at 1, and it was 12:50. I decided I would take it and give it back to him tomorrow in computer science class. I threw it in a little box above my bed. Gotta admit, it was an awesome flash drive. It was a Swiss Army knife with a flash drive in the middle. Here's the crazy part. After that, he never came to school again. He was notorious for being absent, so for the first month no one batted an eye. However, May rolled around and we were all getting ready to graduate. I had completely forgotten about the flash drive, until 2 days ago when I came home. I needed one, and I remembered I still had that boy's. I scanned it with my Norton, and it said it was all safe. I was planning to delete all of his stuff so I could put my PowerPoint for business class on it. Naturally, however, I started snooping through his files. The first thing I saw was a folder named Computer Science. I opened it, and all the answers to every assignment was there. I thought, damn, maybe that's why he left it, so I could copy off of him. Maybe because he knew he was never coming back. I went back, and the second folder was music. I kinda had to open that one to see what he listened to. Surprisingly, not what I expected. There were only 3 songs. Running on Empty by Jackson Browne, White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, and Helter Skelter by the Beatles. I went back again. There was an untitled folder. Inside it was AP Literature. There were a bunch of essays and various junk. There was one called The Best.Doc. I opened it, and it was merely a 10-page document of notebook pages filled entirely with his first and last name, handwritten. I went back again. This is where it gets weird. He had taken pictures of the emergency escape plan posters on the door in every classroom. There was a picture of a lit cigarette on the bathroom floor, and another picture of some coins on the bathroom floor with a yellow post-it note next to it saying, "Chump change" in all caps. Now this is the weird part. There was a picture of me, taken while I was reading a book in class. From the looks of it, it was my English class that he was not in. There was also a document titled, "Rest in Peace to ... but it was empty when I opened it. I still have no idea if this was a joke or not. For all I know, he never showed up again because he realized that he lost his hard drive. This story happened a few years back to me and a friend who I'll call Allie. We're now both 15, making us 12 when this story occurred. Okay, so me and Allie have been friends since 2nd grade, and we would usually spend all weekends and free time together. We always have been into paranormal and ghost stuff. We had every reason to believe that every house we ever went into was haunted. We would go on ghost hunts like the TV shows with a flip phone to record the sounds. But there will always be one night that stands out to me that still haunts me to this day. It was around midnight, and we were hyper and awake like most kids of our age on the weekends. So we decided to do another ghost hunt in my house. We got the flip phone ready, and we borrowed my dad's touchscreen to actually videotape. This was the first and last time we used that. My basement was not like most, because the house I was living in at the time was very old and therefore very old-fashioned. So down the stairs, there's one main big room that we use for storage, and a little further there was another medium-sized room for the washer and the dryer, and the farthest was a small little cell-type room that we never used, mainly because everyone was too creeped out to go in it. Me and Allie walked down the stairs, turned on the camera and flip phone recorder, and we started asking the usual questions you would see on TV, like, is there anybody here? Give me a sign if you're here, and that type of thing. We finally got tired of it and went back upstairs and into my room to be so excited as we reviewed our first video recording. This was a big step for us because we wanted to be ghost hunters so bad. We were watching and we kinda got disappointed as we didn't find anything in the video or voice recording. Usually we would make something up, like a footstep that wasn't ours, to make us feel less bad, but this time we were so excited about the video we didn't even want to make anything up. We couldn't sleep, so we played a few board games, and then we both agreed to review it again because maybe we missed something. And oh boy, we did. While reviewing the tape again, we both could just feel this bad energy coming from it. I guess we didn't realize it before because we were too filled with excitement. We went on anyway, and as we paid more attention, we could actually hear footsteps that weren't ours. Then what showed up on the tape, I still see when I close my eyes. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. The camera was on Allie, and behind her was this figure that looked like a distorted, almost human thing with bright white eyes that almost seemed as if they were watching you through the video. At that point we shut it off, and we were both in complete shock. We couldn't tell my father as he was asleep, being so early in the morning. We both decided to just not tell anybody and keep it our secret. Even though we never went into that basement again, we both still talk and sometimes even dream about it. To this day, I don't know if it was our imagination or if there was something with us in that basement, but I'll never go in there again. So this all happened during Halloween in 2014. My name is Max, and I'm from a small town in Findlay, Ohio. I used to go to a high school at County School about 10 minutes from where I lived called Van Buren High School. Van Buren was a nice little village with good people for the most part, but the only problem was that there were some evil creeps that could be found there if you knew where to look. The biggest hotspot for them to be found was the Van Buren State Park. Everyone knew that the state park had a little infamy to it, as it was known for some rapes and the like. Now I've been to the park many times with friends and classmates, and nothing bad ever happened to us, so I never thought much of it. I have a lot of good memories of the place actually, like the many times when my friends and I would bike the trails and set off the works bombs in the woods or go fishing in the lake. However, fast forward to my senior year at Van Buren on the day of Halloween. My friend Ian and I saw the darker side of Van Buren State Park. The summer before my senior year, I enlisted in the Army National Guard, so it was important that I worked out and stayed in shape. So that day, I asked my best friend Ian if he wanted to go run the trails in the park with me after school, and he said he would, as he likes to work out when he can as well. It was probably about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I pulled into one of the parking lots, waiting for Ian to meet me there, when I saw this old silver car with a bald and just disturbing man suspiciously sitting in the lot. Knowing that creeps hang out at the parks, I glanced over to check out what he was doing when I noticed he was staring at me and would not take his eyes off of me. It was a very unsettling stare, one that made him look hungry and me uncomfortable. His eyes were wide open, and I'm pretty sure he had a frown, or maybe a grin. We made eye contact, and he nodded at me as if he were trying to say hello, but would not drop his glare. I nodded back but broke eye contact since I was pretty uncomfortable. However, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that he was still staring. At this point I had enough and I sped out of there and pulled out of the parking lot. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw he was following me. This made me floor my gas pedal and I sped to my high school parking lot where I lost him. I called Ian and told him that I was at the high school and that he might have to deal with this creep alone. And then my stomach sank. I got a text from Ian saying here. So I made my way back there, and sure enough, right when I pulled in, I saw Ian's car, and 2 spaces away was the scary bald guy in the silver car, still staring. I nodded to Ian for him to follow me in his car to a different parking lot at the park, and we made our way over there. We were safe, or so we thought, and got out of our cars to walk down the hill to check out the trails before we ran them. I don't really like to run with items in my pockets, so we began to walk back up the hill when we saw that old silver car circling in the lot looking for us. At the angle we were at on the hill, he must not have been able to find us, although we could see him. We waited a few minutes before walking up the hill because we figured the two of us, who were athletes, could take on this one guy. As we reached the top of the hill, he was gone. Feeling pretty safe, Ian and I decided to still run the trails, but I made sure to grab a rock to use as a weapon for my own peace of mind in case we would run into the possible rapist or killer in the woods. I'll never know the man's intentions, but given that place's notoriety and his disturbing look, it couldn't have been good. Nowadays I've graduated Van Buren and I'm an infantryman in the National Guard while attending Bowling Green State University. Sometimes when I go back home to visit, I like to go for drives at night, and sometimes I like to check the state park just to see what monsters lurk there. I'm always armed with a knife, and I'm in good shape, but it still makes me uneasy. I'm sure one of these days I might encounter something like that again. But I'm not stupid or crazy, because as soon as I do, I'm hightailing it out of there once again. So as for anyone else, make sure that if you go camping or hiking at state parks, that you are somehow armed, no self-defense, and never go alone. In my room next to my bed is a big storage closet. It doesn't have a regular door like you would expect. It's a kind of big square door without a knob that just comes off when you grab it by the edges. So rewind to several years ago when I was 19. I remember the first time it happened. I went to sleep and woke up in the morning to find that the door had been opened and was leaning on the wooden edge of my bed. Now this wasn't the strangest thing ever, as it had happened in the past. After all, there were no hinges or anything holding the door in. I pushed the door back into the wall and got ready for school. The next night, I woke up around 4 in the morning. I could have sworn I had woken up to a noise. I sat up and looked around my room in the dark, and noticed the door was leaning on the edge of my bed again. Now I was concerned that the edges to the hole in the wall were starting to chip away, and the door could no longer fit as tightly as it used to. I left it that way overnight and fixed it in the morning. The following night, I was having trouble sleeping. It had to be at least 2 hours of my rolling around bed trying to fall asleep. That's when I heard a huge thump, and I knew what it was. I could even see it in the dark. The door fell open again. I was so done with this. I mentally decided to just leave it open from now on. That's when I heard the slightest movement of a plastic bag from inside of the closet. My heart literally skipped a beat when I heard this. There was no draft in the room at all. I hesitantly flicked on the light switch and looked into the open closet. My biggest fear came true when I saw someone inside the closet peering at me in my bed. Within maybe half a second of my turning on the lights, he tried to hide as if I didn't see him. I couldn't even move. All I could do was scream the word "Dad." I screamed so loud it took my dad maybe 10 seconds to make it to my room. I pointed at the closet and he looked inside. Only then did I finally feel safe to get up and stand behind him. My dad crawled all the way in there, and he couldn't find anyone though. He came out and assured me I was just seeing things, and I started to question that myself. Still, I couldn't sleep in that room. I slept on the floor in my parents' room with a blanket. Well, I wouldn't say slept, as before that could even happen, I heard my bedroom door open from down the hall outside, and then someone literally ran down the stairs and out the front door, slamming it behind them. My parents heard it, and it was only then they believed me. We tried to chase whoever it was down, but he was gone. We later found out he was hiding in an empty container inside the closet.
Not to get too deep into backstory, nor disclose too much personal information about myself, but I'll just come right out and say it, that I've always been a reclusive person, ever since I was a young kid. I didn't have many friends at all, and I spent most of my time playing video games on the computer, or varying consoles I grew up with. As I got older, like high school, I started to get into just going on long walks exploring. I'd walk through the woods, walk through cemeteries, and then I developed an obsession with trespassing, going places I wasn't supposed to be. It started with sneaking into cemeteries at night. Then I started getting more experimental with it, like exploring abandoned hospitals and schools. When I was finally able to drive, it made accessing all these places much easier, of course. I only went with one of my few friends once or twice. Honestly, I enjoyed it more by myself. Part of my weirdness includes the fact that I don't get scared exploring abandoned places at night by myself. Or perhaps I should use past tense and say, I didn't used to get scared. How I used to find a lot of abandoned structures was simpler than you might think. I would just go on Google Earth and zoom into rural areas. Then I would look for abandoned-looking structures in unsuspecting places. I would then make a list of 5 to 10 locations of these structures and try to visit them all in one day. Sometimes they wouldn't be abandoned at all, but I eventually got pretty good at gauging which ones would be. This hobby involved a lot of walking through woods, and yes, before you ask, I did have a job. I worked a minimum wage job as a stock boy at a supermarket, so when I wasn't doing that or in school, a lot of time I was doing this. One of the places on my list one day turned out to be an abandoned little church. I had to park on a dirt road and get out of my car to walk. It was about a 10-minute walk. I'd always wear jeans and boots so that I travel faster through the woods without hurting myself. I started noticing old, rusted garbage cans and other junk scattered in the woods, indicating I must have been close. And then I saw the clearing in the distance approaching, along with the structure. And there it was, some dilapidated old church sitting in a random clearing in the woods. It had an old well right in front of the building. I walked over to it to see if it had been sealed, but surprisingly it hadn't been. I looked down, and it was so deep that it was pitch black down there. When I stopped and listened, though, I heard something down there. It was a faint clicking sound. It happens like on a rhythm, 1 click after 2 seconds. It didn't sound like water droplets. The best I could describe it is a stick being tapped on a stone wall. Curious, I stared down for longer than I probably should have, kind of like I was hypnotized by the sound. But eventually, I broke out of my daze and decided to go inside the church. I stepped onto the creaking wood porch, and the rotted boards gave slightly under my weight. The large double doors were ajar. Not surprising. Out of all the abandoned structures I'd visited, unless it was a very well-known one posted frequently in subreddits, there wouldn't really be anyone boarding these places up. I pushed one door open further, which led to a loud groan that echoed through the trees. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. Light poured through the shattered, stained glass windows. Some of the pews were overturned or missing entirely. The pulpit stood crooked at the front, and behind it, an arched doorway led further into darkness. I did the usual, scanned the inside with my flashlight and took a few pictures from my archive on my digital camera. There was an eerie beauty to the decay, a holy place like a church in near ruin. It was beautiful but tragic. I walked slowly toward the back of the church where the arched doorway was. I stepped through it and found a narrow hallway that led to what looked like old storage rooms. One door was missing entirely, and the others were splintered or hanging off their hinges. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling everywhere, and then I saw at the end of the hallway was a stairway leading down into the basement. Jackpot, I thought. Like I said, I used to not let anything scare me. Nothing within reason, at least. Something about exploring abandoned basements excited me, but this time, something about that basement door hanging open leading to the darkness below made me pause. I honest to God got a slight chill, but I kept going. I started down the stairs slowly, and each step creaked so loud that I feared I'd fall through the wood. And then, I counted 7 steps until my right foot landed on one that gave way with a loud crack, and before I could react, it collapsed under me. I fell hard and landed in a pile of junk and dirt below the stairs. I fell directly on my ass and hurt my tailbone. I let out some kind of audible complaint, probably a "God damn it" or something. My flashlight flew out of my hand, so I crawled over to grab it. That was when I heard a voice. It was a higher-pitched sounding voice, either a woman or a young boy. It was saying words, but I couldn't understand any of them except for one thing. They said hello. The rest was gibberish, like someone trying to talk but didn't know how. I stood up and pointed the flashlight around. It was just an old basement, some busted furniture, mostly cots, a dirt floor, stone walls, but then I saw a tunnel in the wall. It looked like it was dug out by hand. As I approached it, I realized the voice was coming from down there. I started walking toward it. I was being dumb, but I had to know what it was. I stepped just a couple of steps inside the tunnel and looked around. The walls were rough, not smooth. It had definitely been dug out with a shovel by hand. My flashlight started flickering, and I nearly had a heart attack. I hit it a few times, and it stayed on. Doing so made a louder noise than I anticipated, though. The voice got louder, still just gibberish with that same weird tone, but I could now confirm it was coming from deeper inside this tunnel. And then it stopped. Everything was quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard a click. 2 seconds later, another click. Same rhythm and sound as the well, and the sound echoed. These clicks and the gibberish echoing voice were getting louder. My heart was now in my throat, so I turned and ran back. I reached the stairs and remembered one of the steps was broken. I found it easier to grab the sides of the stairs and pull myself up, instead of trying to hop over the broken step. My flashlight dropped, but it didn't matter. I was leaving the basement back to the light of the upstairs. I got to the top and didn't look back. I ran through the hallway, through the main room, and out the front doors. I ran past the well and stopped for a second. The clicking sound was gone. There was no noise at all. Come to think of it, it was dead silent. I didn't even hear any birds. I looked down the well one more time. Still pitch blackness. With that, I turned and ran through the woods, making it to my car much faster than I made it to the church, albeit completely out of breath. I cut the day short and didn't explore the other places on my list. This was just one of those experiences where you don't know what to think, and you just drive home in silence with the music off. I didn't give up my hobby of exploring entirely, but I took a break. I was admittedly very spooked. I hope it was just some other kids exploring in there trying to mess with people, but I don't know. When I think about it, that sounds really unlikely. This happened to me a while ago and is still stuck in my mind. Me and my friends often like to be in the outdoors. I'll refer to my friends as John and Anthony. We were bored and decided to go fishing deep in the woods near some farmland. We were chased out by a farmer and his dog. We tried to hide, but his dog found us and he threatened to call the police, even though he was already on the phone with his friend, which we found weird. Honestly, we kind of found it funny. So for whatever reason, we thought it would be a good idea to go back the next day and sneak onto the property to explore it. It was nearing about an hour before dark, and this property was huge, acres upon acres. We had to hike through some deep woods, similar to the one we had been fishing in before. Although we scoped it out on Google Maps, it was still easy to get lost. I remember thinking to myself that we should be out of there before dark. At first, everything seemed normal, and I wasn't getting any bad gut feelings. We were admiring the horses and petting them. I remember thinking it was weird having all this farmland and only horses. I compared it in my head to my uncle's farm, which is a lot smaller but has about 10 different types of animals, not just one. I just brushed it off and thought that maybe the owner specialized in horses. After walking through the woods, we reached the fence bordering the property. John was leading the way, I was in the middle, and Anthony was behind us. This is when we stumbled upon a rundown house with multiple trophy cars and a broken down RV. We were shocked at the discovery and snuck around some of the cars. There was also a very creepy rundown shed. It was crazy to see. I even took this video.
Fucking Corvette. Raptor. Bentley. Holy shit.
There were multiple Porsches, Range Rovers, Ford Raptors, Bentley sports cars, Corvettes, and Ferraris. The deeper we got and the more cars we saw, we realized we probably shouldn't be seeing this, since some of the cars were parted out. We suspected it was probably a criminal ring stealing cars. After we had seen all the cars, John decided it was a good idea to explore the inside of the camper while Anthony kept lookout. I held the door open for John since he's kind of the smallest, so I thought he would be best suited to explore it. There was evidence somebody was living there, fishing rods, fresh food, bedding, and other stuff. Although the camper was run down, we understood it was somebody's home, so we got out of there. I forgot to mention there were also car tires inside. We were not there to break or destroy anything, just look around. We snuck around to the back of the property where all the cars were. There were side-by-sides, and we made the connection that they were probably used to run the property. There was also a rundown shed, and when we went inside the back of it, we caught a foul, horrible smell. We kind of just brushed it off and laughed, joking that maybe it could be a body. None of us really believed it though. Then we heard the gate at the entrance of the property open and slam. It was about 1,000 feet away. We were heading back to the woodline because we didn't want anyone to see us, and that's when a van turned onto the street we were on. It was nearing dusk and the headlights were on, so we sprinted through the woods, not sure if he saw us. This is when we probably should have left, but we decided to explore the other side of the property. After walking along the outskirts and hiking through more woods, there were a lot more horses, but we finally got to the main house of the property. Again, it seemed very run down. About 25 feet to the right was another camper, or at least what looked like a camper. It was massive, about 50 feet long, and probably hadn't moved in 50 years. We almost missed it because it was completely covered in vines. Right next to it was another rundown jet ski, also covered in vines. We managed to get the door open, but didn't want to make too much noise since we were so close to the main house. Even though it seemed abandoned, we wanted to be cautious, not just because we were trespassing, but because there was similar suspicious stuff on both ends of the property, which I could only assume was connected to the car stealing ring. I knew if we were caught, it would be a problem. We snuck around the house and saw what was probably the most luxurious car on the property. Although it was run down and old, it was still an amazing sports car, a Ferrari. I didn't get a picture or a video since we were still near the main house and the horses were making a lot of noise. We got sketched out on the far end of the property. There was a boat and cooler inside a fridge. John looked around the boat, and the cooler was about 15 feet into some very thick vegetation. We joked about the probability of a body being in there. At this point, the mood was still kind of jokey because we were exploring something we weren't supposed to see. When we got closer to the freezer, another terrible smell came, like the smell of death and rot. We decided to back off, assuming the worst, and didn't want to open it in case there was something we really didn't want to see in there. We got a bad vibe, and we were on our way back when Anthony started hearing things. We paused and listened with him, and we heard the noises too. I can't really describe them. I don't know if they were just normal wood noises or if everything just seemed amplified because we were paranoid. The vegetation was about head high, and there was a rock that each of us took turns standing on to get a better view of the property. When John went up there, we were still laughing and joking. Then he turned to us, looking like he had just seen a ghost. He wouldn't speak, so I decided to get on the rock and look for myself. What I saw is seared into my brain. Over the vegetation, I saw a man sitting at a table with a black cat. That wasn't the scary part. When I looked at his face, there was no hair, no eyes, no mouth, no nose, no facial features at all. You can call me crazy, but I know what I saw. We were about 50 feet away, and it felt like the man was staring at us, but we genuinely couldn't see his eyes since he had no features. There was also a woman with him who made direct eye contact with me, and that was the moment she started running in a direction to cut us off from the property. I don't know if the man's featureless face was real, or if he had white medical tape or bandages covering it. I still can't decide, but his face was pure white and his head was very small. I still can't get it out of my head. After that, it was still dark, and we had a long hike through the woods to get back to where we came from. We felt as if we were being followed almost the whole way, and we almost took a route that was 2 miles out just to get away. There were weird noises like stomping feet, galloping, and screams. We tried to be quiet through the woods, but also tried to move quickly. We ended up making it back and made sure we weren't followed. I genuinely still don't know what that was, or if it was human, but I can't get this experience out of my head, and I know none of us will ever go back.
I went to a quarry in McKinney, Texas, and I will never go back there again after what happened to me. Here is a little backstory so this will make sense. The first time I went to this quarry, it was pretty sketchy. Me and a couple of my friends, Josh and Miles, went to this quarry for cliff jumping, since we had seen some YouTube videos of people cliff jumping at it, and we found out that it was only about a half hour away from where we lived. Both Miles and I are old enough to drive, me being 16 and Miles being 17, so we thought that it would be a really good idea to go. Once we got to the quarry, it had a really sketchy vibe to it. There was a small dirt road that led up to the quarry, which made a circle around it. To the left were these ghetto-looking white buildings, which were pretty much just white metal boxes, and to the right was the fence that surrounded the rock path that led to the quarry. We drove down this road in Miles' Jeep, and there were tons of signs saying stuff like no trespassing or warning blasting zone, and there was even this big white piece of cardboard that read, "Trespassers will be shot on sight." It's important to note that in Texas, people can legally shoot you if you're on their property, but it just doesn't really happen much. We decided to drive back to the beginning of the road where there was this gravel parking lot by an old building which looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Miles parked the car, and we all reluctantly got out of the car and began our walk to the quarry. While we were walking, a truck drove right past us, and the driver just kind of looked at us with a blank expression on his face. Honestly, it was pretty scary when the car passed us, but the fact that he didn't do anything made us think maybe they don't care too much if we're on their property. We kept on walking, and then we came to the fence where we were supposed to jump to get onto the rock path that led to the quarry. We went to the smallest cliff jumping spot first, and saw a pretty big snake swimming in the water after the first 10 minutes of being there, so we decided to wander further down the quarry where we saw a decent sized cliff, about 35 feet. After depth checking it, we spent about an hour cliff jumping there before we got bored and moved on to the next cliff. We were at the very end of the quarry, and we were walking down a path to get to a bigger spot when we saw a black Hummer stop. The lady in the Hummer was probably in her mid-30s. She rolled down the window and yelled, "What the f*** are you doing on my property?" It honestly kind of shocked us all, and I responded with saying in an innocent voice, "What do you mean? We thought this was public property." She knew we were lying straight to her face and yelled at us some more. Then she said something that I'll never forget. She picked up her phone and said, "John, get the gun." Me, Miles, and Josh all froze. We were scared to death. She said to follow her and drove slowly down the path about 20 feet to a gate. We decided to follow her. We were all saying that we were so sorry and that we would never come back again, and she let us go after saying the cops are on their way, so you better haul ass that way before they get here, and pointed towards the dirt path that led us away from her property. We told her thank you and ran faster than any of us thought we could. Then we got in the Jeep and drove away. I wish this was the end of the story, but it isn't. A couple of months later, Miles asked me if I would ever go to the quarry again, and I reluctantly told him that if we had a bigger group together, then I would go. We got a group of 5 together and went back to the quarry in my car. I drove, and after about an hour, we arrived at a church which we would be parking at, which was about 2 minutes away from the quarry. We didn't want the lady somehow seeing our car and getting our license plate number. We walked down the dirt road that led to the quarry and passed by a few cars. One car stopped next to us, and a guy who was probably in his early 20s told us to watch out for a black Hummer. We laughed and told him the story of what happened the first time that we went to the quarry, and then we were back to walking down the dirt road. We jumped the fence that surrounded the quarry and decided we would just go to the second spot, so that we would at least be a tiny bit out of sight of the dirt road. We were at the spot for about an hour and having fun when a silver van pulls up at the end of the dirt road about 25 yards away. It wasn't the black Hummer, so we weren't running away just yet, but we were getting our stuff ready in case we had to run. It was for the most part out of our sight due to trees being in between us and the van. We waited there for about a minute and thought that the guy was just doing something in the car when we heard 2 loud gunshots really close to us. The gunshots scared us half to death. The exit of the quarry was not very close, probably about 300 yards, and about 125 yards to get on the main dirt road which led off the property. I led the way, with my friend Aiden trailing not far behind me. I heard more gunshots about 40 yards away, and it sounded like he had shot about 8 shots so far, but when I looked back, I couldn't see the guy who was shooting at us. We got to the fence and jumped it, and we were now on the main dirt road that led to the exit. Out of pure luck, the guy we had talked to earlier, who had warned us about the black Hummer, was in his white truck on the dirt road. We begged him for a ride, and he gave us a ride back to the end of the property. We thanked him and then ran back to the car. We all got in the car and drove away, never to see that quarry again. Back in 2018, my cousin Ryan and I were really into urban exploration. We had been to old factories, shuttered schools, and forgotten farmhouses that looked like they were one good windstorm away from collapsing. We were not stupid about it. We checked floors before walking on them, wearing masks where there might be asbestos, and avoided any place that seemed like it might be actively guarded. Still, there was one place we'd been talking about for months that neither of us had worked up the nerve to try. The big abandoned house on the shore of Lake Harlow. It was the kind of property you only ever saw from a distance, sitting far back from the main road behind a set of tall iron gates that had been bent inward years ago. Pines and brush had grown wild around the driveway, hiding most of the place unless you caught a glimpse through the trees while driving past. Local rumors about the place were endless. The most common story was that a wealthy family had lived there in the 90s before suddenly disappearing. People claimed they'd left in the middle of the night without taking anything. Furniture, clothes, dishes, even family photos were supposedly still inside. Theories ranged from financial ruin to witness protection to something even darker. No one had ever bought it afterward, and the property had just sat there decaying for more than 2 decades. The afternoon we went, the weather was gray and still. We parked at a hiking trailhead about a half-mile from the property, and we walked in through the woods to avoid being seen from the road. As we got closer, the roofline appeared through the trees, and I realized just how big the place really was. 3 stories with tall windows and a wide wraparound porch, all in various stages of rot. Paint peeled off in long strips like sunburnt skin, and sections of the porch sagged inward. We circled around to the back, moving quietly in case there was anyone nearby. The back door was unlocked, and the moment we stepped inside, the air changed. The air was still and smelled faintly of lake water and dust. The kitchen was the first thing we saw. It looked like a movie set frozen in time. Plates were stacked neatly on the counter, and a coffee cup with a brown ring of dried residue sat beside the sink. The cabinet stood open, showing old boxes of food that were long expired. A faded calendar on the wall still hung open to May 1997. We moved through the downstairs slowly. The living room still had furniture draped in yellowed sheets. The fireplace was still filled with crumbling ash, like the last fire had burned out decades ago. Family photos were hung in the hallway, with people smiling at barbecues and dressed up for Christmas. Honestly, I got the chills for some reason as I looked at these photos. There was something eerie about seeing cheery family photos in a long-abandoned house. Some of the photos had sun-faded so badly that their faces were almost ghostly white. Upstairs is where things started to feel off. The first bedroom we entered had a perfectly made bed, but all the dresser drawers were open and completely empty. Another room's floor was entirely covered with newspapers from 1997, each one folded open to the classified ads section. I didn't think much of it until I noticed the dates. They were all from within the same week in July, and every circled ad was for private buyers looking for quiet transactions. The master bedroom was the strangest. The heavy curtains were drawn shut, but when I pulled them back, I found the windows had been boarded over from the inside. The closet door had a rusted padlock on it, and the floor in front of it was scratched, as if someone had tried to drag something heavy out but couldn't. Ryan wanted to force it open, but I talked him out of it. We didn't have tools, and I wasn't eager to break something in a place where we weren't supposed to be. He suggested we check the basement before leaving. The basement door was in a narrow hallway off the kitchen. When we opened it, a wave of damp, cool air came up that smelled strongly of mildew. The stairs were wooden. Each step down creaked like it might give way under us. The basement was big, with thick stone walls and wooden shelves along one side. Most were empty, except for a few rusted cans and a broken lantern. But in the center of the room, illuminated in our flashlight beams, were 5 chairs, all mismatched and old, but arranged in a perfect circle. Unlike everything else in the house, they weren't dusty. The seats looked recently used. I was about to whisper something to Ryan when we both froze. Somewhere above us, a door closed. The sound was clear as day, and it was followed by footsteps crossing the floor above. We killed our lights instantly and stood in the dark, barely breathing. The footsteps paused, then started again, moving toward the hallway above the basement. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. We hadn't seen any cars outside. We hadn't heard anyone else since we got here. Whoever was up there hadn't made a sound until now. The footsteps stopped again, this time directly above the basement door. Then the sound of the door handle rattling made my blood run cold. Ryan grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the far end of the basement where a small ground-level window sat broken and half covered by a rotting shutter. It was barely big enough to fit through, but we didn't care. I went first, scraping my jacket on the glass, dropping down into damp dirt outside. Ryan was right behind me. We sprinted into the tree line, not daring to look back until we were well into the woods. When I finally did glance over my shoulder, I saw the basement door wide open and someone standing in it. They were too far away to make out any details, just tall and still. It looked like their head was tilted slightly, like they were watching us. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. Both of us were so disturbed that we barely even spoke on the car ride home. That night I just kept replaying it in my head. Everything from the chairs, to the footsteps, to the locked closet, and then that horrifying image of that figure on the porch. So a couple weeks later, Ryan called me and told me that after he made a post in a Facebook group asking if anyone knows about the history of that house, an older guy responded to his post saying that there have been sightings of someone in that house, and the first guess would of course be a squatter. However, that wouldn't explain the strange, almost ritualistic looking circle of chairs in the basement. At this point, it's not my problem to worry about. I'm just happy we got out of there in one piece.
Number 4. Me and the girlfriend were on our way to her parents' house. I was invited to Thanksgiving dinner with them, which was a huge honor for me since I'd only met her parents 3 times. I was also nervous since her grandparents and aunts and uncles would also be there who I had never met. We had a long trek from my house to her parents' house. It would be a good hour-long drive. About 45 minutes into the drive, we had to stop for gas. We pulled up into a literally dead Gulf station right off the highway, and I decided to fill up with premium for once to do my car a favor. Of course, it was cheaper to pay with cash, so I went inside with my head down as I dug my hand inside my wallet searching for a 10 and a 20, and when I pulled the bills out, I instinctively looked up and said, 30 on 2 please. But I stopped mid-sentence. There was no one there. I looked for a bell on the counter. None. I simply called out, "Anyone there?" There wasn't even a back door behind the counter that you would assume would lead to some kind of employees only room. No, it was just completely empty. The only other door in this little gas station besides the entrance was the single bathroom, and that door was open, exposing the blackness from within the bathroom. I figured maybe whoever was manning the cash register may have just gone outside for something. I walked back outside and shrugged my shoulders at my girlfriend out of confusion. I looked around for maybe a porta potty or an ice machine or something that could be distracting a potential cashier, but there was nothing. It was a relatively small little station with foliage surrounding it in almost all directions. I figured maybe somebody could be behind the building smoking a bogey or a doobie, so I went back there as a final attempt. Nope. Just a dumpster sitting under a dimly lit roof light. Ugh, I figured I'd just pay credit at this point and turned back. But as I did, somebody from out in the woods called over to me in a kind of whispery yell. My heart skipped a beat when I heard this. Hey! Hey! I kept hearing it from the woods. I took out my phone and flipped on the flashlight just to skim the outer tree line for anybody who could be hiding in there. As my now shaking hand rotated the phone slowly, the light momentarily revealed somebody from behind a tree. I took off back to the car and stepped on it out of there. My girlfriend was scared shitless just in reaction to my fear. I told her about the bizarre thing that just happened, and from that point on, she kept looking through the rearview mirrors just to make sure we weren't being followed. We pulled up to the next gas station we could find, this time one that actually had a cashier. I paid him $30 and began filling up. A van pulled up to the pump right behind mine, and a man wearing a cap stepped out staring intently at me. I tried to act as if I didn't notice him, but when it got to the point where he was staring at me for at least 20 seconds straight, I had to look at him and ask him if there was a problem. He finally turned away. The second I was done, I hopped back in the car and took off once more. We made it to her parents' house safely, and I don't believe we were followed. Now, I wouldn't have shared this story if it weren't for the fact that a few weeks later, I did some research and found out that a 33-year-old Indian man who worked at the gas station we had stopped at had been murdered and his body was stuffed in the woods behind the station. I immediately gave the police a tip about the guy who I saw at the station who was surely caught on camera. The following year on Thanksgiving, a similar murder happened at another gas station. We have since nicknamed him the Thanksgiving Killer. I fear only the worst once more this year, as he has still not been caught. Number 3. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. It was Black Friday, meaning me and my brothers were going video game shopping. Our first and only stop was Walmart. The place was absolutely mobbed, and being Walmart, it was mobbed with the wrong kinds of people. Gross, weird, and just creepy people everywhere trying to save a few bucks on already cheap products. We rode the escalators upstairs to the video game section. I was looking for the latest Call of Duty game personally, but my brothers were looking for some other game I don't remember. Then, out of nowhere, some creepy, heavy, oldish man who smelled like vomit walked up to me and said, "You like video games, huh?" "Yeah," I said. I began to slowly slide away just to show that I wasn't interested in conversation. "My son likes video games too. Maybe you should come over and play some with him. He really craves company." The man gave me a creepy smile. "Oh, no, I'm not from around town, sorry." That's all I could think of saying. I didn't even give him a chance to keep this conversation going. Hell, I wasn't obligated to stand there and talk to this guy. I simply gave him a smile and called my brother's name out while walking away just to seem distracted. I did a quick backwards glance. He was just staring at me as I walked away. I made it to the next aisle over and immediately felt comfort in being next to my brothers. I waited around until they finally found their game and we headed over to the checkout counters. The lines were insane. I knew it would probably take 10 to 15 minutes just to make it to the counters, so I took that opportunity to check out some of the jeans and t-shirt sales. At one point, I found myself in probably the most secluded corner of the store checking out some t-shirts when someone grabbed my arm hard. I thought it was my brother messing with me, so I turned around and told him to fuck off. But it wasn't him. It was the man. I started calling for help, screaming that I didn't know this man. Some people came over and stared, but that was about it. The man let go and walked away. I don't know what he was thinking or planning on trying in such a public place. I didn't tell my brothers what happened out of embarrassment, but they picked up on the fact that I was quiet afterwards. "It's nothing," I kept telling them. We got into my brother's Camaro, and when I sat down, I looked to the entrance of the Walmart. There he fucking was, sitting at the bench, facing me. As we were leaving the lot, we had to pass right in front of the store. I got one last look at the creepy man. His head moved ever so slightly to constantly face me, even through the car window at night. I gave him the finger, but it didn't seem to influence him in the slightest. That was the last I ever saw of him. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. Number 2. It was Black Friday 2013, and I decided to be one of those people who gets up at 3 a.m. to get some early deals. Home Depot was having crazy deals on artificial Christmas trees, so I wanted to get there early and buy one for my family. They opened their doors at 3 a.m. on the spot, 3 hours earlier than usual for Black Friday. Surprisingly, only me and one other guy were waiting to get in. I guess everyone else was at Best Buy or the mall. I found a nice 9-foot-tall artificial Christmas tree, originally for $200, but at that moment half off for only $100. I asked one of the few employees working at that hour to help me carry the box to the checkout and then to my car. The parking lot was still surprisingly empty for Black Friday. I figured maybe I didn't have to come so early. I tipped the guy and got in my car ready to leave when someone knocked on my window. I lowered the window, and some guy, mid-20s, beanie, black, and tall, leaned into my window asking if I had change. I opened the little compartment in between seats where I normally keep change, and it was actually empty. I didn't want to have to hand him a 10, so I said, "Nah, man, sorry." He looked disappointed, and I actually felt bad. He then asked me if I could give him a lift to the nearest gas station. I was a bit nervous about letting a stranger in my car, but guess what? I let him in. He did not thank me, which kind of hurt, I guess because I'm a little sensitive. I asked him if he knew of any close-by gas stations. He just said, "Nah." A few seconds later, I asked him why he needed to go to a gas station, and I swear to God, he didn't answer. It's not like he didn't hear me. He just flat out ignored me. I stopped looking at him at that point because I was feeling a bit uncomfortable now. I kept driving down main and side roads, but there was no goddamn gas stations anywhere. I was trying not to look in his direction, but I could tell he was staring at me. Every turn I made, every stop sign I stopped at, he was staring at me. I was sweating now. This guy was freaking me out. I felt like at any moment he could just grab my throat and I'd be done for. At last, I could see a gas station just beyond a light which had just turned red. Why did it have to turn red just now? I thought to myself. I could still feel his stare, even as I looked the other way. I finally decided to sum up the balls and looked at him. I felt his cold, emotionless stare run straight through my eyes into my soul. Are you okay? I asked him. He ever so slightly nodded his head, almost not even noticeable. The light turned green, and I pulled into the gas station. He stepped out and stood by the sidewalk and watched me as I pulled away. When I got past the intersection, I laughed out of joy and the ridiculousness of the situation. But then I realized something. I patted myself down and then began to panic. I was missing something. My phone. I was only a few blocks away, so I made a U-turn and headed back to the gas station. He was gone already. I drove home and confirmed that my phone was missing. I knew I had left it in the cup holder of my car. My phone had all of my info on it. I contemplated calling the police, but I didn't. I couldn't even sleep that night in fear of some freak stranger having my address. The next night, after getting home from our 2-day delayed Thanksgiving dinner, I found my front door was open and my entire house was trashed. I called the police with my neighbor's phone. They didn't find him in there, but they found his prints everywhere. The only thing, the prints did not match anyone on record. Number 1. It was Thanksgiving. I had half the family over, along with the next door neighbors, Tom and his wife. They don't have a big family, so they used to come over to watch the game with us on Thanksgiving. After eating dinner, we all sat in the living room to watch football, except for my daughters Tracy and Michelle, who aren't into football. At the time, Michelle was only 13 years old, and Tracy was 16. During halftime, I decided to go up to Michelle's room to get her to come down. She finally budged and came down to the living room. Me, Tom, and a few in-laws went outside to smoke. Me and Tom talked about his son, Sam. Apparently, Sam had gone back home to be alone and watch movies. He had been with us earlier. Tom joked that he was probably just watching porn, though. I laughed. I stared up at one of the windows to my house, the window to Michelle's room. There was someone looking out the window. What the hell is Michelle doing back in her room, I thought. But then I realized that wasn't Michelle. In fact, I didn't know who the hell that was. I excused myself from the group and stormed back inside and upstairs to Michelle's room. Michelle followed after she saw me enter her room. "Did someone just come in here?" I asked. "No, why?" I looked around the room. It was completely empty. I nudged Michelle to go back downstairs while I turned off the lamp. We went back to the living room where the game would be starting up momentarily. I finally decided to ask everyone if anyone had been in Michelle's room at her window. Everyone either said no or shook their heads no. Someone had to be lying. I heard a slight thud come from upstairs in Michelle's room. I ran back upstairs, again with Michelle following me. I flicked on the lights in her room and spun around in a circle looking for someone. The sliding closet door was cracked open. I just realized. I thought I could see something through the crack. I squinted my eyes to try and see what it was. It was an eye. I screamed like a child for maybe 2 seconds, followed by Michelle. Relatives ran up into the room as I angrily slid open the closet and pulled out Sam, Tom's son. Tom ran up and found me basically holding Sam by the neck. Sam was holding some belongings of my daughter that I'd rather not talk about. This incident definitely scarred, maybe even ruined my friendship with Tom and his wife, and it's made me that much more protective over my daughter.
My name is Gregory, and this happened last December when I was home alone in my house for a whole week. My girlfriend had gone to stay with her parents for the holidays, and I stayed behind because of work. I live in a quiet neighborhood in a small town in upstate New York. The houses are pretty spaced out, and most of the people on my block go away for Christmas, so I basically had the whole street to myself. At first, I liked the idea of the peace and quiet. I thought I would get a lot of rest and maybe catch up on some shows and just enjoy the coziness of the holidays for a bit. But what happened that week still lives rent-free in my head. It was on my second night alone. It was around 6:30 and already completely dark outside. It had been snowing lightly all day, and there was a white layer on my yard and driveway. I was in the kitchen making a simple dinner, just pasta and chicken. Usually my girlfriend is the one to cook our meals. I'm not much of a chef. I turned on the TV in the background to make the house feel less empty, because as happy as I was to have the place to myself for a bit, I wasn't used to it being so empty and quiet in here. While I was eating at the table, I heard something unusual. It really took me a second to figure out what it was. It sounded like singing. I muted the TV and listened. The sound was definitely coming from outside. The singing got a little clearer, and I realized the person was singing Jingle Bells. At first I thought maybe some neighborhood kids were playing around outside, but the voice didn't sound like a kid. It sounded like a grown man. I got up and walked toward the front door because that seemed like the direction it was coming from. The closer I got, the louder it got. By the time I reached the door, it sounded like the singing was coming from right on my front stoop. I felt a weird feeling in my stomach, but at that moment I still thought maybe it was just a caroler. I opened the door, and standing in the glow of my porch light was a man around 35 years old. He wore no hat and his coat looked too thin for the weather, but the strangest thing was that he was completely focused on singing Jingle Bells, staring down at my welcome mat like he wasn't even aware I opened the door. I remember forcing a little smile because I didn't really know what else to do. I'd never gotten Christmas carolers before. But even still, I never heard of a grown man doing it solo. It's supposed to be a group thing from what I know. He didn't look dangerous, he actually just looked sort of confused or maybe slow. I even wondered if he was special needs or something because he didn't react to me being there. He just kept singing. When he finished the song, I expected him to say something, or at least leave. but he just took a breath and started singing Jingle Bells all over again from the beginning in the same slow off-key tone. But now he was looking up at me, making direct eye contact. I felt my smile drop because it was just weird now. I stood there another minute, pretending to listen even though it felt uncomfortable. I kept thinking he would stop after the second run, but he didn't. He just looped the song. I checked my phone and realized almost 4 minutes had passed while he sang Jingle Bells over and over. Finally, I decided it was enough. I told him thank you in a polite tone, and I slowly closed the door. I thought that would send him on his way, but once the door was closed, I still heard the singing. It continued without even slowing down. I walked back to the table and sat down trying to ignore it, but the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore. The man didn't seem normal, and it bothered me that he was still right outside my door singing the same song. I wondered if maybe he was special needs and someone was out there with him, like by the street or something, but I didn't see anyone else out there. It made the whole house feel uncomfortable, like someone weird was standing too close to my personal space. I kept eating, but I couldn't focus on the food. It went on for my entire dinner. Finally, after about 10 minutes straight, the singing stopped. The sudden silence actually made me jump because I had gotten used to the singing. I got up slowly and walked back to the front door window. When I looked outside, I expected to see the man gone, but he was still there. He had moved. Now he was standing at the end of my driveway. He was just facing my house, completely still. He was no longer singing, at least I couldn't hear anything from here. He was just standing there in the snow, staring at the door. Something about that felt worse than the singing. He looked like he was waiting. I opened the door a crack and told him he couldn't be here, that this was private property and he needed to leave. He didn't move at all. The whole thing was so unnatural. I finally told him that if he didn't leave, I would call the police. Then I shut the door again. I watched him for another minute from the window, but he didn't budge. I didn't want to actually call the cops because I thought maybe there was something mentally wrong with him and I didn't want to make things worse. So instead, I decided to just go upstairs, lock my bedroom door, and try to relax. I checked out the window upstairs before changing into bedclothes. The man was gone from the driveway. Thank God. I figured the threat worked. I got into bed, turned on a lamp, and started reading my book to wind down. Maybe 20 minutes went by when I heard something from behind the house. I knew instantly what it was, unfortunately. It was the same man singing Jingle Bells again, except now it was coming from my backyard. I jumped out of bed and went to the back window. When I looked down, not only was he directly inside of my backyard, he was already looking up at my window. The man was in my backyard standing in the snow directly below my bedroom window. He was looking straight up at me while he sang. I slid open the window and yelled at him that I was calling the police. The singing stopped instantly. He stood there in total silence for about 3 seconds. Then, he suddenly burst into a full sprint toward the back door on the lower level. The second he was out of my view, I heard the most insane sound I've ever heard in my life. He started screaming at the top of his lungs, not like a normal scream. It sounded like a death metal singer, but even more insane and deranged. It echoed across the yard and through the entire house. Then came the banging. The back door shook violently as he kicked it, slammed into it, and probably tried ripping the doorknob off. I felt the vibrations from the impacts in my upstairs bedroom. I realized this guy wasn't just weird. He was trying to get inside. I grabbed my phone and called 911 right away. I begged them to hurry, telling them a man was trying to break in. I stayed on the line while holding a baseball bat with my other hand. I backed into my bedroom closet and shut myself in. The operator told me to stay hidden. I could still hear the screams and bangs from downstairs, and every second felt like he was going to break through. Then, just as suddenly as they started, the bangs stopped. Everything went silent except for my breathing. I didn't know if he left or if he got inside. I stayed completely still in the closet until the police arrived. They checked the entire outside of the house and confirmed the back door was still locked. The operator said I could come out and meet them. When I stepped outside to greet them, I finally felt like I could breathe again. We walked around the backyard and saw deep footprints in the snow, showing exactly where he had stood while singing to me through the window and where he had run up to the back door. The footprints then led off into the woods behind my property. The cops went to follow the trail a little bit, but came back because it apparently wasn't worth going deep into the woods at night. They acted like it wasn't a big deal. They told me people act strange all the time and that as long as I kept my doors locked, I should be fine. They didn't seem very interested in finding him, and that bothered me a lot, but I was too shaken up to argue. After they left, the house felt horribly empty and cold. I kept every door and window locked and double-checked them over and over. At that point, I was over the alone time and just wanted my girlfriend back home. I went down to my parents' place for Christmas Eve and Christmas, thankfully. As far as that man, he never returned. At least, not that I know of. This story is about my Christmas experience from about 10 years ago. I was 6 years old, since my birthday was in November, and I had just finished celebrating. Now we were getting ready for the holiday. My birthday celebration happened on the same day as the famous Odell Beckham Jr. catch. I lived with Cowboys fans, but I was a Giants fan. I remember it being talked about for the rest of the night, and even during my birthday celebration. It was an eventful birthday week, and I'm surprised I remember all of this since I was only 6. I didn't understand football, but I understood that the catch was crazy, so I was just living in the moment and happy it was my birthday, like any other kid. For my birthday, I got tickets to the Mavs-Wizards NBA game on December 30th. I was a Cavaliers fan, but since we lived in DFU outside of Dallas, I knew a lot of Mavs fans, and I was a small fan myself, so I was grateful. It was going to be my first NBA game. Christmas Day was 5 days before, and I got a brand new Odell Beckham Jr. jersey and a Mavericks shirt and sweatshirt as I was becoming a sports fan. I had a great Christmas, but one of my Christmas gifts was another Mavs game, which was on December 27th against the Oklahoma City Thunder. I was so excited to go to both games. The day came and we went to the game. The Mavs won a close one, something like 112 to 105. It was crazy to see an event like that in an NBA arena for the first time. We left the game and drove home, which was maybe 45 minutes away from the American Airlines Center. The next couple of days were normal, but I was excited to go back to that amazing stadium and atmosphere. This time we went again. I didn't know it would be the last time I went for years. At the last game, we had nice seats, like 7 rows from the court and in the middle. But this time, we were maybe row 20 and in a corner area, so the experience was different. The game was going well, and I was enjoying it. The Mavs were killing them by like 20 to 30 points at halftime. Since I was a child, I wanted to roam around and get food and go to the bathroom by myself, but I was with my parents and only 6 years old. So my parents and I walked to get some food. We waited in line for maybe 20 minutes. My dad went to another restaurant inside the arena to get different food, and I stayed with my brother who was waiting in line to pay. As we talked to the worker, I walked away to throw out some of the candy they bought me before the game. I walked to a trash can maybe 30 feet away. As I got there, this tall white man came up to me and asked, "Hey, are you lost?" I shook my head and didn't say anything. He said he didn't see my parents around and told me, "Let's go look," as he grabbed my hand and walked with me. I was just a kid, so I walked with him. He took me toward the nosebleeds and said we were going to the intercom so they could announce my name and find my parents. I said okay and kept walking. We got to the top and we waited for about 10 minutes. He waited until the coast was clear and then tried pushing me towards the emergency stairs or elevator. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember there was no one around. Then I remembered stranger danger, and the guilt and fear started sinking in. I realized I shouldn't go with this man. He didn't have any credentials. When he let go of my hand to go check his phone, I ran all the way back to the stands. As I ran, I saw him standing there with a small grin on his face. I couldn't find my parents, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be somewhere safe. I found my brother, who hadn't told my parents he lost me because he didn't want to get in trouble. He asked if I was okay, and I said yes, choosing not to say anything. The game ended and the Mavs won, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go home. As we exited, I was quiet. When we got in the car, I was also quiet. My parents seemed confused that I didn't seem energetic, but I told them I was tired. As we drove home, I almost fell asleep, but then a loud honk screeched behind us. It was so loud I almost screamed. I turned around, and there he was. The same man driving a truck with maybe 3 other men inside. I couldn't tell who they were, just silhouettes. My parents yelled at them from our car when they pulled up next to us, but the men just stared. I wanted to say something so badly, but for some reason I didn't. When we got home, I went right to sleep and passed out fast. In the middle of the night, I woke up with chills. I noticed a light flashing at my window. I looked out, expecting something innocent, Santa Claus or something, but instead saw that man standing out there, shining a flashlight into my bedroom window. I screamed and ran to my parents' room, telling them someone was at my window as if it were a first-story window. They rushed outside and searched for maybe 20 minutes. They didn't find anything, and since I was a kid, they didn't believe me. They said it must have been a shadow from a car, but I know what I saw. On New Year's Eve, a couple days later, we were staying up until midnight to watch the ball drop. We were about 5 or 6 minutes away from midnight when the doorbell rang. My parents answered it. I didn't pay attention until I heard the man's voice, and I was 100% sure it was him. I told my parents, but they didn't believe me. I told them at the game he brought me to the high level, and I ran away and escaped. But they still didn't believe me. They said it was just a man handing out lost dog flyers for his cousin's dog. The night went on, and I was fine. But then a year later, on New Year's Eve, there was a knock at my bedroom window. Keep in mind, I had forgotten about the situation. I got up and looked, and there was a piece of paper on the window that said, "This New Year, you'll meet me again." I gave my parents the note, and they filed a report, but they never heard anything back. Every couple of years, I get terrified of New Year's Eve, thinking that man will come back. I told my parents I never want to go back to an NBA game, saying it wasn't my thing. But now I'm 16, and it scares me that the man knows where I live. I'm considering going to the Cavs vs. Mavs game on January 2nd or 3rd, which would be my first game since then, but I'm not sure. This experience scared me away from basketball and made me always close my curtains. I remember this night way too clearly, and even now I think about how close my family came to something really terrible. It was early December, and we decided to drive up north into the mountains to cut down a real Christmas tree. It was something my wife Marianne and I always wanted to do, and our 7-year-old son Andrew was excited about it too. The weather was cold and cloudy, and the sky had that heavy look where it feels like snow is always about to fall again. To us, that added to the Christmas vibe. The whole ride up the winding roads made me feel like a kid again. It was a while since I'd done something this unique and in the Christmas spirit, and having Andrew so excited about it just brought me back to my youth. When we finally reached the remote area Marianne found online, there were no other cars around in the parking area. There were a bunch of light posts scattered around, so we weren't in pitch black darkness if you were wondering. That's why we picked the place. Still, we did bring flashlights. We parked by a small, unmarked path that led deeper into the trees. There was a lot of snow on the ground still from the snowfall we got a few days earlier, and up this high, the snow took even longer to melt. Andrew jumped out of the car right away and started throwing snowballs at us, so I started throwing them back. We were here to have fun, so of course I was going to try to make it as memorable as possible for Andrew. I grabbed our flashlights and the axe that I planned to use to chop down a tree. We walked up the narrow path with snow crunching under our boots. Andrew kept running ahead, stopping to point at trees he thought might be perfect. The deeper we went, the more the road behind us disappeared, and the only light came from the faint moon glowing behind the thick clouds. It was so quiet that I even asked Marianne and Andrew to stop for a second, just to really take it in. There was not a single sound, maybe a light breeze, that was it. To be honest, if I had been there alone, I'd have been slightly creeped out just off the silence and darkness alone. As we walked deeper onto the trail, we had to utilize the flashlights we brought, all three of us. Andrew was having a lot of fun with the flashlight until the light from the parking lot was no longer visible, and it was now basically total darkness outside of the flashlights. He started to get a little nervous evidently because he asked how far we were going to go, and he made a comment on the darkness. I kept feeling like someone was watching us or like something was walking behind us, but every time I turned around, there was nothing but the empty snowpath. About 10 minutes in, we finally found a spot where the trees were tall and full. Andrew ran around them in circles looking for the best one. Marianne stayed closer to me and whispered that she wanted to pick a tree fast because she had a weird feeling too. I got exactly what she meant. This was a lot creepier than I had imagined. Right then, I heard soft crunching behind us. It wasn't any of us, nor was it an animal. It sounded like boots crunching the snow, but very slowly, sneaking-like. When I turned around, I saw a man in dark clothes, standing about 20 feet back on the path. He wasn't dressed for the weather. His hands were bare and red from the cold. His jacket looked more like a windbreaker. His face looked pale and stiff, like he'd been out in the cold for way too long. Marianne grabbed Andrew's arm to pull him closer. When the man noticed we were looking at him, he suddenly smiled in an off-putting way and stepped closer. He asked if we were looking for a Christmas tree. His voice breaking the already unsettling silence was uncomfortable. His voice was deep and kind of soft. Before I could say anything, Andrew answered yes, excited again, and I felt a jolt of panic because I didn't want this man knowing anything about us. Marianne quickly told him no, that we were just walking. The man stepped closer again, and the way he moved made every hair on my arm stand up. He told us not to worry because he wasn't a park ranger. He said it like he could tell exactly why we lied, because admittedly, what we were doing was super illegal. I didn't want to talk to him at all. Something was wrong with him. He looked hungry or desperate or like he hadn't slept in days. I guess, for lack of a better word, he looked homeless. I told Marianne we should head back to the car, and she nodded, gripping Andrew's jacket. When we started walking past the man, he stood by, smiling and watching, giving slight nods as if to say goodbye as we walked. Andrew kept turning around, asking if the man was following, and we told him to stay facing forward. Every time I looked back, the man was a little bit closer than before, even though I didn't hear him speed up. I whispered to Marianne that when we reached the main road, we had to run to the car. She held Andrew's hand tighter and nodded without looking back. The man's steps stayed behind us the whole time, dragging a little like his boots were too big or too heavy. Once we got close enough to see the gap in the trees where the car was parked, I told them to go. Marianne lifted Andrew and ran as fast as she could. The only reason I felt even remotely safe was because of the axe in my hand, but I'm not a violent person and I've never had to resort to violence in my entire life. I turned around to block the path behind us for even just a second. The man had stopped walking and was just staring at me, and he put his hands up halfway, still smiling, and then he said, "I mean no harm. Why don't you get back to your truck now?" And I felt my heart skip a beat as he said this. He said truck, like he knew we came in a pickup truck. I replied back simply that we don't want any trouble. Then I turned and started hurrying back down to the lot. But halfway there, Marianne screamed my name, sounding panicked. Oh no, I thought. When I got to the truck, she showed me that both right side tires were punctured. I didn't have time to examine it for long to realize it was him. I told Marianne to call 911 immediately, but she struggled to find service at first. She walked around the snowy lot for a bit until there was reception. She never strayed too far away. I had Andrew wait in the truck, who was now clearly concerned as he watched Marianne and I freaking out. He was old enough to know something bad was happening. Marianne seemed to be having a hard time on the phone, so I took it and explained our location and that we felt threatened by a random man in the woods who may have potentially been responsible for the tires. Given the potentially unstable individual in the vicinity, and the fact that we had a child with us, police were taking this very seriously and told me to keep my family locked in the truck until police arrive and that a tow truck will be sent as well. I was instructed to keep the operator on the line while we waited, but eventually the line started getting choppy, cutting out at moments because of the poor reception. Then, Marianne suddenly screamed in my ear to look and pointed towards the tree line by the path we were on. There were multiple people standing just beyond the tree line. I counted at least 3. They looked like shadows from where we were, which made the sight even more terrifying. It was like we were being stalked and hunted. Then 2 of the people started walking closer. I told the operator, and she said something that really made me uncomfortable. She asked if I had any kinds of weapons, and when I said I had the axe, she implied that if it came down to it, to use it to defend my family. By this point, Andrew was crying, and Marianne tried to calm him down. I told the operator that 2 of the figures were still walking toward the truck. They weren't running or yelling or anything. They just walked very slowly, like they knew we weren't going anywhere. The 3rd figure strangely disappeared, likely back deeper into the woods away from the light. The operator told me the police were close, but I had no idea if that meant 2 minutes or 10. I kept looking back and forth between the tree line and the road in the distance, praying to see flashing lights. I tried to talk to the operator again, but the call dropped. The second it cut off, everything felt 100 times worse. I locked the doors again, even though they were already locked. I kept my hand on the axe, gripping it so hard my knuckles hurt. As the 2 people were now within range of hearing them speak, we could hear them saying, "We're here to help," as they waved their hands in the air. We didn't recognize either of them to be that guy from earlier. "Do you think they're park rangers?" Marianne asked, and I said firmly, "Not a chance." But perhaps I said it too loud, because Andrew just started crying even more, which Marianne had to try extra hard to console him. These 2 people approaching were dressed similarly to that first guy, aka way underdressed, and their clothes looked worn out, almost dirty, and they didn't seem bothered by the cold at all. But then, seemingly randomly, the 2 of them turned around and started running back in the direction they had come from. We didn't know why just yet, but it was soon clear. Never have we been so ecstatic to hear the sound of police sirens. It was getting louder fast, and eventually we saw the flashing lights coming from down the road. Coming pretty fast, actually. The police SUV entered the lot with its spotlight on, and it instantly shined in our direction. I flashed my lights to try to get the cop in the car to see the men running back into the woods. At this point, though, they were already nearly gone. But their footprints weren't. Once the SUV was next to us, 2 officers jumped out immediately with flashlights drawn, and I got out to basically get on my knees thanking them. I pointed in the direction the men ran. I said they disappeared into the trees like they had rehearsed where to go. The police told us to stay inside the truck while they searched, and more units showed up within minutes. 1 officer stayed with us. Andrew was no longer scared, but rather once again excited at the commotion and the sight of police officers. After a long search, the police came back and told us what I already knew they were going to say. They didn't find anyone, just tracks in the snow that went deep into the woods and eventually spread out in different directions. They didn't know if the people lived somewhere out there or if they were part of some kind of camp deeper in the mountains. They said sometimes drifters or squatters stay hidden in remote areas during the winter. The tow truck eventually arrived, and the police stayed around us the entire time until our truck was loaded up. We had to sit in the back of a patrol car to stay warm while they finished everything. No one really said much. Marianne held Andrew in her lap, and I just stared out the window, watching the dark tree lines, half expecting to see someone standing there again. On the ride back home, none of us talked. It was like all of us were afraid that saying anything out loud would make it real again. We didn't try to cut down a Christmas tree ever again. We didn't even go back to that mountain area. Even now, 10 years later, I refuse to go anywhere near it. To this day, what scares me the most is the thought that they had been watching us long before we even noticed them. They saw us arrive in that parking lot because they knew to strand us by slashing my tires, and they were waiting for us to go deep enough into the trees so we wouldn't make it back to the truck. We were lucky we trusted our instincts enough and decided to leave for the truck almost right away. We were also lucky I was holding an axe, which may have dissuaded them from doing something crazy. I don't like thinking about how close we came to potentially never going home. I still think about this one night from when I was 9 years old. It was a few days before Christmas. My parents both had things to do that night, and since I was almost 9, they felt okay leaving me home for a little bit. My mom had to run to the grocery store to get some stuff for Christmas dinner, and my dad was working late like he usually did in December. I was sitting on the couch watching a Christmas movie probably, and eating cookies by the fireplace and tree. Outside, it was already dark, even though it was still relatively early, and I remember the Christmas lights flashing on the houses across the street. It was normal, until the doorbell rang. The only reason this made me stop and look was because it was rather late and random for someone to ring the bell, and my mom always told me never to answer the door when I was alone. My parents never ring the bell, obviously, since they have keys. I got up and walked to the door anyway because I wanted to look through the peephole. When I put my eye up to it, I saw there was a man standing on the porch wearing a Santa Claus suit. It was the full thing, too. The red coat, the hat, the beard, everything. But he didn't look like a normal, friendly Santa. He wasn't holding anything besides what looked like a clipboard, and he was standing way too close to the door like he was waiting for me to unlock it. I didn't know what to say at first, so I just kind of whispered, "Who is it?" The man moved his head a little closer to the door like he was trying to see through the peephole or hear me better, and in that moment, he figured out right away that I was a kid. He did, I guess, what was his best Santa impression, as he said he was Santa and that he had gifts for me, and that I should open the door. At 9 years old, I wasn't stupid, and I didn't believe in Santa anymore. My parents taught me about strangers. I told them to go away and that I didn't need anything, and I tried to sound brave, but my voice cracked. The man went silent for a second, and then he asked me if I was home alone. As soon as he said that, I knew to walk away. I instantly felt stupid for even letting him know I was home. I didn't answer him. I stepped back from the door and walked fast to the living room because I suddenly felt too scared to stand near it. I sat on the couch and grabbed a pillow and stared at the TV like acting normal would make the fear go away. But then I heard the doorknob twist. He was testing if the door was locked. I wanted to scream for help, but nobody was home. I waited and hoped he would leave. But a moment later, I heard another sound from the back of the house. It was the back doorknob twisting. It happened so fast after the front door that I bet he ran around the house to the back. That door was even weaker than the front one, and we almost never used it. I felt frozen in place, and all I could think about was that my house only had 2 doors and this man was trying both. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the phone and dialed my mom's number. When she answered, I started talking really fast, trying not to cry. I told her someone was trying to get into the house and he was dressed like Santa. My mom got serious right away and told me she was coming home right now and that I should not open any doors no matter what. She told me to stay in the living room and keep the curtains closed. I sat on the floor behind the couch where I couldn't be seen from any windows, and I stayed completely still. I kept hearing small noises outside, like footsteps or light taps, just some forms of sounds indicating that someone was still there. Eventually, they stopped, and not long after, I heard a car pulling into our driveway, and I knew it was my mom because I recognized her squeaking brakes. I stayed where I was until I heard the front door unlock and slam open. My mom came in breathing hard and holding 2 grocery bags. She locked the door behind her and yelled out for me, and I ran to her right away. She hugged me and then told me she had just seen a man dressed as Santa walking down our street. She said she slowed her car down when she saw him, and she yelled at him out the window asking what he was doing. The man told her he was going door to door asking for donations, but she didn't believe him for a second. She said he looked nervous, and that he walked away fast when she started yelling. My mom told me she was proud of me for not opening the door and for calling her right away. She called the police and reported the man, and I'm sure police at the very least surveyed the area. We never found out if he was arrested or if he just disappeared into the neighborhood. 2 neighbors did say, though, that the man knocked on their doors asking for donations, though they said it seemed like a scam. Regardless, that doesn't change the fact that he tried to get into our house, where he knew a little boy was home alone. I still think about that night every year around Christmas when I see Santa decorations. I just remember being 9 years old and knowing that man on our porch was not Santa and that he wanted something else. I guess I was lucky the doors were locked and my mom got home when she did. What would have happened if that door was unlocked is terrifying to think about.
get right to the point. My middle son is a senior in college. He's a good kid, most of the time. I'm a bit cross with him right now, because he just asked me for money for a spring break trip to Hawaii with his friends, which kind of caught me off guard. Like I said, he's a good kid, and I want him to enjoy himself, but something about the way he asked rubbed me the wrong way. His mother's been struggling with her mental health lately, and it would have meant a lot to her to have him around, but I guess he's more preoccupied with getting wasted on a beach with his frat brothers. I can't even say I blame him for it. I was exactly the same when I was his age, and I see a lot of myself in that kid. The whole thing actually got me reminiscing about my own college days and reminded me about something I haven't thought about in a very long time, which is the story I'm about to tell. Funnily enough, my son is the one who introduced me to this page, so maybe he'll get a kick out of this if it gets read. I went to Wharton, class of '85, something I'm still damn proud of. It was and still is the most prestigious business school in the world, and I took that reputation seriously. I had my fun, but I also worked like hell. It was a different time back then. A lot of my classmates were crazy, like Wolf of Wall Street crazy, and I did my best to avoid getting swept up into that life. My junior year, though, I did something a little impulsive. I was dating a Puerto Rican girl named Maria Munez, who I remember fondly. Sometimes I try to imagine how different my life would have been if I had chosen to take things further with various girlfriends I had, her being one of them. Instead of going home for spring break like I usually did, Maria convinced me to come home to Puerto Rico to meet her extended family. It was my first time on the island, and I was eager to impress her, so I agreed without hesitation. That being said, I was a nervous wreck. I didn't want to mess anything up, and Maria often joked about how open Puerto Rican families were, so I was aware that they already knew a lot about me. It turned out that my anxiety was mostly unjustified, as I got along really well with everyone upon meeting them, and it seemed like they really liked me. Most of the trip was about meeting her relatives, but we did have time for a few outings of our own. I mean, it was spring break after all. One of those outings was a hike through El Janqué, which, fun fact, is the only tropical rainforest in the US National Forest System. Neither of us had a car, obviously, so Maria's mother drove us and dropped us off at one of the most popular trailheads. The two of us were pretty devious, so we definitely took advantage of the fact that neither of us had to drive. The plan was to hike, enjoy the scenery, and sneak a little rum we'd packed. Everything was lining up to be perfect, but we quickly realized there was a big problem. The trail we were most excited about was closed. I don't remember why, flooding, maintenance, something like that, but all I remember was that Maria was really upset. I tried to calm her down and told her we could just hike one of the many other trails the forest had to offer. She wasn't budging though, and told me that the trail we planned on hiking was like the premier trail, and the other ones didn't even come close. How one hiking trail could be astronomically better than the other, I really couldn't tell you. She was adamant though, and I had long since learned the dangers of arguing with her over something like this. So I asked her what she wanted to do instead, and she told me we should just hike the closed trail anyway. Like I said, I was kind of rebellious back then, and so was she. So when she proposed that idea, I was on board. We'd come all this way, and now some rule was going to stop us? No chance. She gave me a look, and that was all it took. We made sure there was no one around, slipped past the barriers, and started up the trail, laughing like a couple of idiots. At first, it was exactly what we wanted. Better even. It felt like we had the whole forest to ourselves, which was especially awesome given how popular this trail would have been otherwise. Imagine visiting a world-famous natural site, except you're the only one there. That kind of exclusivity is impossible to come by. Anyway, we hiked for a decent while, passing little waterfalls and admiring the beauty of the forest. And yes, we were also drinking. Not excessively, but just enough to feel a good buzz. It was really fun, I have to be honest. But then, out of nowhere, Maria screamed and jumped back, almost knocking me over. That instantly put me on high alert, although I didn't know what had scared her. I looked around frantically until I saw it. A little further down the path was what looked like a freshly decapitated mongoose. Let me repeat that, it was a mongoose. A big one too, and its head looked like it was completely missing. I told Maria to stay where she was and approached the carcass by myself, hoping it was maybe a stuffed animal or something. It wasn't. I inspected it without getting too close and confirmed what I initially thought. Its head was cleanly sliced off. The cut was too precise for it to have been anything other than a knife wound, which was downright disturbing. The worst part, though, was that the body hadn't started smelling yet, meaning it probably hadn't been there for very long. Maria was shaking. I was mostly shocked by it. I tried to reassure her by saying something dumb, like how crime in a national forest was unlikely, even though I couldn't explain it myself. I put my arm around her and ushered her past the body, trying to block it from the line of sight. All I could think about in that moment was putting some serious distance between us and that poor lifeless creature. We walked in silence for a while, and even though we distanced ourselves from the mongoose, I could tell the moment was gone. The adrenaline rush had worn off my buzz and erased my good mood. As bad as I felt, though, I could tell that Maria was significantly more shaken, and I couldn't imagine that she was even enjoying herself in the slightest. She said that she wanted to stick to our original plan of hiking the whole trail to the other side, but it was obvious that she didn't want to be in that forest anymore, and I couldn't blame her. As we were walking, I couldn't help but rack my brain, trying to figure out what we had stumbled upon. It didn't make any sense. I wasn't aware of the hunting laws there, but I couldn't imagine that hunting in a national forest so close to a pedestrian trail could be legal. And yet, that was the only explanation I could think of. Why they had left that mongoose's body there to rot was beyond me, but there was no other rational explanation. Maybe it was a hunter who had seized upon the opportunity to have that part of the forest all to himself, like we had. I really didn't know. Maria and I hiked another mile or so, with me trying to cheer her up the whole time, but nothing was working. Eventually, she admitted that she wasn't feeling well and wanted to turn back. I didn't argue, although I was definitely dreading having to walk past that spot again, mostly because I wasn't sure how it was going to affect her, and I just wanted her to feel comfortable. We retraced our steps, and I could tell we were closing in on the spot where the mongoose had been. I told Maria to keep her head down so she wouldn't see, and she did. I braced myself as we turned the final bend, but when the spot came into view, the mongoose was no longer there. Someone had moved it. My heartbeat started racing, and I instantly began scanning nearby trees, terrified that there was someone hiding among them. I was not prepared for what came next. Instead of seeing a person, I noticed something hanging from one of the trees. It was a mongoose. It was strung up with twine, its paws tied together. There was a sickly green liquid dripping from its body that hadn't been there before, and it was rotating slowly in the wind. I couldn't help but curse out loud when I saw it, which caused Maria to open her eyes. As soon as she saw it, she let out an awful, blood-curdling scream of pure terror. Before she could freeze up, I grabbed her wrist and told her to run. We took off sprinting down the trail, trying not to trip over each other. I let her go in front of me and kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be following us. Instead, a deafening scream rang out from somewhere behind us. It was a woman's scream, and it was absolutely terrifying. It sounded like the kind of scream someone getting attacked would make. I felt Maria's body jolt mid-stride, and for a second, I thought she was going to collapse. She let out this panicked sob and tried to push herself even harder, but she was already out of breath. I kept my grip on her wrist, practically dragging her along as she slowed down. We couldn't stop. My own chest was burning, but we needed to keep moving. Eventually, Maria could barely run anymore, so we had no choice but to slow down to a fast walk. I turned around completely and started walking backward, keeping my eyes locked on the trail behind us. I was bracing myself for a fight. Something had strung up that mongoose. Something had caused that scream. I was 100% sure that I'd see something charging towards us any second, but nothing ever happened. The trailhead finally came into view, and for a brief second, I thought we were in the clear. But then I saw someone standing near the barricades watching us. It was a park worker with his arms crossed, clearly pissed off. As soon as we slipped past the barricades, he started yelling at us about breaking the rules and told us he was kicking us out and banning us for life. But then he got a good look at Maria, who at that point was both sobbing and physically exhausted. I told the guy everything, not leaving a single detail out. He took it really seriously. He He told us we both needed to come with him, so we did. We were taken to a small ranger station near the parking lot where a supervisor was waiting. I had to go through the story again, then again when they called the police. Maria didn't say a word. Eventually, her mother arrived and we left, still shaken. I never heard anything about what the authorities found, or if they even bothered investigating. I'm sure Maria's family might have heard something, but we broke up the following summer, and we fell out of contact after that, so I really wouldn't know. I haven't thought about this experience in a long time, but it's still just as unsettling as it was all those years ago. I think the worst part about the whole thing was that scream, because we never saw anyone else on that trail, and I have no idea who it belonged to. I'd consider myself a pretty laid-back guy. I'd say the same about most of my friends. This happened last year, so I'll get right into it. Spring break was supposed to be just me and my friends Jackson, Ariel, and Isabel camping on a secluded beach in Alabama. No crowds, just stars and waves. We got there late, later than we planned. We parked in the closest lot and began walking toward the beach. The place was dead quiet. No other campers, no fishermen, nothing but empty sand stretching for miles. According to Isabel, who was familiar with the area, locals sometimes use that part of the beach for overnight fishing, but that night it was empty. It wasn't fully dark out yet, but the sun had started setting, so we'd need to set up camp quickly. Jackson and I began pitching the tents. Since I had driven, I had brought my dog Bean with me. He was a Doberman who loved the sand, so we all got a kick out of watching him run and roll around. At one point, Ariel pointed out a car in the distance, saying it had driven by twice already. I turned. An old, beat-up-looking SUV slowly rolled past on the narrow access road that ran parallel to the dunes. The access road was a little more than a strip of packed sand, just wide enough for one car. On one side was the beach where we were, and the other side was a line of shrubs. You couldn't really see the main roads from where we were. The car drove by and ultimately disappeared down the road. The four of us shrugged it off and went back to setting up, and by the time we finished, we decided to crack a few beers and chop it up in a circle. The girls drank seltzers instead of beer, which we made fun of them for. It was almost fully dark at that point. I can't remember who noticed it first, but that car that had driven by was back again. Only this time, it stopped when it was parallel to us. The driver's door opened and a man got out. I could tell it was a man because he was really tall, although I couldn't make out any features of his face. He began walking towards us, and the girls got nervous. Jackson and I told them not to worry, and we got up to go intercept the man before he could reach our campsite. Bean was already on high alert, so I told him to come with us. As we got closer, I started to notice that he was walking oddly. There was this slight limp in his walk, and he almost stumbled a few times. When we got close enough, Jackson said, "How's it going, man?" trying to keep things light. The guy didn't waste any time. He immediately said, "You're on my property." He slurred his words a bit, and I figured he was a little drunk. I told him we thought the beach was public land. Keep in mind, it was really unlikely that some dude owned the beach. There were no private signs anyway. After I said that, the guy didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a knife. Bean started growling in response to the man's body language, which honestly should have scared the guy off given how scary Dobermans look. But he didn't budge. Instead, he started running towards us with his knife outstretched. Bean charged at him and jumped to attack his arm that was holding the knife, causing him to fall to the ground. I yelled no at the top of my lungs as I didn't want my dog to get stabbed, but Bean somehow got the dude to drop the knife. The man screamed in pain as Bean bit his arm. I whistled for him to get off and he listened to me. He ran back to my side but kept his eyes on the guy who was now writhing in pain on the ground. Eventually, the guy got up and started running back towards his car. Jackson and I ran back to the girls, telling them everything. By the time we finished, that SUV had driven off. The girls wanted to pack up and carry everything back to the car, but there was a part of me that was nervous about that plan. That guy was unhinged. There was no telling what he'd do, and I wasn't keen on walking in darkness with my hands full. Isabel made a good point though, saying that he might return with a gun or something. I told Ariel to call the police and tell them where we were and what happened. Once the police were close by, the four of us started walking towards the parking lot with our stuff. Bean was on high alert, and I have to admit the only reason I felt even remotely safe was because of him. I noticed lights up ahead near my car, and I was relieved. The officer stepped out to take our statements, and I was not ready for what happened next. He quickly pointed out my car's tires were slashed, and I was horrified to find out they were. The officer unholstered his weapon and told me to unlock the car, which I did. He opened my trunk, but thank God it was a false alarm. The officer was nice enough to help me with my tire situation. Thank God we brought Bean with us that night. That guy was probably a drunken lunatic. It could have probably been a quadruple murder if he had gotten his way. Finding a nice secluded place to hang out is definitely an awesome time, but it obviously comes with its risks.
It was spring break 2023. My friend Michelle and I booked a trip to Miami for a weekend. It was both of our first times in Miami. We were both 22. We stayed at some full house rental in Wynwood, which was like a 20-minute Uber from the beach. We got there on Thursday and we were staying until Monday. We landed pretty late in the day Thursday, so we just went out to some nearby bars for the first night. It was fun. The following day, we Ubered to Miami Beach to have a beach day. We brought the towels from the rental and just laid on the beach for hours. Multiple groups of guys approached us and we just reject them or whatever. But there was one guy who approached us, I guess specifically me, that just had this really charming accent, seemingly nice forward personality, and honestly everything about him was handsome, from his hair down to his physique. He introduced himself as Will. He asked what our plans for the night were and asked for my number, and honestly I gave it to him. Then he was off on his way down the beach. He didn't seem to be with anyone. We watched to see if he'd stop and try to get more numbers, but he didn't. He was just walking away looking at his phone, and eventually walked off the beach in the direction of the street. Michelle was a little jealous that he showed me more attention, I could tell. Later that day, after the beach and some bars, we left Miami Beach because it was a little too crazy for us. Definitely because it was spring break, but it was just a bit much. We returned to the rental with some drinks and snacks from a nearby store. We drank in the backyard by the pool, listening to music on Michelle's speaker while we plotted our night. It was around this time I shot Will a text asking what he was doing for the night. He responded very quickly, saying he and his friend didn't have plans yet, and then he suggested the four of us go out by us in Wynwood. Michelle jokingly asked if the friend was cute, but I wasn't going to ask that. We made a plan for Will and his friend to come pregame with us at the rental, so they came around 8. The friend's name was Ken, and he was surprisingly good looking as well. I could tell Michelle was pleasantly surprised. They brought their own drinks and left them on the counter in the kitchen, and we drank in the yard for like an hour. They seemed very normal. All seemed like it was going well. We eventually walked to a nearby bar. It was also in Wynwood. I have to admit, Michelle and I were already drunk, and Ken and Will kept buying rounds of shots. Things became a blur pretty quickly. I wouldn't say I blacked out, but bits and pieces of my memory became foggy at that point. Eventually, Michelle and Ken went to another side of the bar, presumably to hook up, so I was alone with Will for quite some time. Eventually, I had to go to the bathroom, but before I left, I remember him calling out, "What do I want for my next drink?" I replied back, "A tequila soda." When I came back out from the bathroom, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Will was like hovering over the corner of the bar, clearly doing something sketchy. I walked a certain direction to get a better angle, and I saw he had the 2 drinks in front of him, but he was hovered over them as if he were doing something to my drink. I may have been drunk, but that was enough for my intuition to tell me to leave. I walked away without him noticing to the other side of the bar, looking for Michelle, but she and Ken were gone apparently. So I rushed out of the bar and tried calling her a bunch of times, but she never picked up. Around this time, Will texted me asking where I went. I ignored it. I texted Michelle a bunch of times, asking what happened, where is she? And then I eventually dropped the bomb that I think Will was trying to roofie me and that we should get away from these guys. I started walking back to the Airbnb. This was when Michelle texted back, asking, "Why do you think he was roofieing you?" And I said because he was hovering over the drink he ordered for me, doing something to it. She texted back maybe he was just on his phone. I tried calling her, but again, she didn't pick up. She texted back instead, saying, "I'm still with Ken, just text." I responded to her that I already left, so I'm not going back anyway, and I suggested she meet me at the Airbnb. She responded, "I'll be back soon." So I walked back. When I got back, I let myself in with the code lock. The door automatically locked after like 10 seconds. Same thing with the back door. I sat, really drunk and by myself, honestly worried about Michelle, but also I feel like I was wondering if I was just overthinking the whole roofies thing. Maybe he was just on his phone. Either way, it was too late now. I was surprised that Will never attempted to text or call me again. Next thing I remember was the doorknob to the back door jiggling, and then I heard the button sound effects of the code lock, followed by a failed attempt sound effect. I then got a text from Michelle saying to open the back door. I went to the back door and called Michelle's name through the door. She didn't answer though. So I tried calling her phone, but she didn't pick up. I got a text back saying, "Hurry, open the door, he's coming." And this was when I really started to freak out. I yelled through the door, "Michelle, you're scaring me." There was no peephole or windows to look through to see if it was really her. I begged her to please answer me. She never did. There was a peephole in the front door, so I hurried to the front and looked through it. I actually felt sick at this moment, scared for my life, because I saw what looked like Will hiding to the side of the front door. A million thoughts crossed my mind, like if Michelle was running from Will. I was still too terrified to open the back door without her confirming it was her. I texted her back that I'm calling 911 right now. She didn't respond. I actually did call 911 and explained, and while I was on the phone, I checked the peephole again, and Will was gone. When police showed up, I let them in, and within 5 minutes, one of them asked if my friend was blonde, and I said yes. He then told me that another officer had her in their squad car and was bringing her here. I was so relieved, but also horrified. When she arrived in a second police car, she had been visibly crying. She was very, very drunk. To the best of her ability, she explained that she had her phone stolen and she was lost wandering the streets for an hour until someone helped her call the police. All of the texts I got from her number were never her. It was that guy she was with, Ken, or whatever his real name was. We also found her phone thrown in the pool in the backyard. They clearly took off the second I mentioned the police. We had to make a police report giving every last detail as specifically as possible. They said they'd get the surveillance footage from the bar we went to. We also had to contact the Airbnb host and immediately cancel our stay and go somewhere else. It was a long, nightmarish night. Obviously, the rest of our trip was completely spoiled. It took a whole week before hearing back anything from the police, and the only reason they called was to confirm what the name that guy that I was texting gave me, because it didn't align with the phone records for that number, which I'd already figured out myself. He was using another stolen phone. After that, I never heard from the police again, which is absolutely sickening how little priority the police put into cases like this, even with easy evidence. I have no interest in returning to Miami after this horrible experience. I could have honestly been killed. My name is Anna. My friend Lena and I had been looking forward to spring break for weeks. We were two broke college juniors desperate for a change of scenery, but neither of us could afford the classic trip to Mexico or Hawaii, so we were kind of restricted to somewhere in the continental US, preferably not too far away. So when we found a cheap Airbnb near Charleston's historic district, we booked it immediately. 5 nights of food, bars, and exploring. It felt like exactly what we needed. Plus, it was my first spring break above the age of 21, so I wouldn't have to constantly stress about which places were likely to snatch my fake ID. By the 3rd night, we'd settled into a routine. Sightseeing during the day, hopping between restaurants and bars in the evening. I'm not a heavy drinker, and neither is Lena, so we were getting more enjoyment out of just experiencing what the city had to offer. Early that evening, we ended up at this tiny seafood spot we had found online. Fried shrimp, hush puppies, sweet tea, you know, that sort of vibe. The place honestly felt like a hidden gem, and I was impressed that Lena had been able to sift through all the touristy stuff to find something a bit more authentic. The good vibe didn't last though. We were halfway through our late lunch when my phone buzzed. I glanced down. It was a number I didn't recognize. The message just said, "Hey." I stared at it for a few seconds before showing Lena, asking her if she knew the number. She looked at my phone and said she didn't. I figured it was just a scam or something, but usually those scam texts say more than just "hey." Maybe it was a wrong number. I typed back a quick "who is this?" and went back to eating. Lena and I were laughing about something silly when another text from that same number popped up on my phone. It said, "Look outside." That one made me pause. I glanced toward the window next to our table, expecting to see someone waving or messing with me. Maybe one of my friends from school had coincidentally taken a trip to Charleston at the same time we had. But there was nothing, just the street with people walking by like normal. I told Lena someone was messing with me, and she agreed, saying it was probably just a prank. I laughed, but the thought of that really creeped me out. None of my friends were really the type to do that, but I guessed it could have been some guy who had previously hit on me and was bored or something. Up until that point, the whole thing still felt harmless, but then another message came through, just a few minutes later. It said one word, "Anna." That stopped me cold. If this person knew my name, it definitely wasn't a wrong number. Probably not a scam either. I gasped and showed Lena, and she reminded me about something I had completely forgotten about. On our first day in Charleston, Lena and I had entered one of those giveaways at a local cafe. It was one of those win a free meal promotions where they ask for your name and number and a few other things. It had completely slipped my mind, but as soon as Lena brought it up, that's all I could think about. I hadn't given my number to anyone in Charleston either, so it made sense. I told Lena whoever was texting me probably had her number as well, and the two of us kind of freaked each other out. Dinner wasn't as fun after that. In all honesty, I felt too out in the open. We paid the bill and decided to shake it off at a rooftop bar across town. It was packed and seemed like the type of place that attracted a younger crowd, so it was a no-brainer. After a few drinks, I was starting to loosen up, and Lena and I were enjoying ourselves again. But of course, that didn't last long. I got another message from that number, but this one was so much worse. It said, "That's a nice red jacket." I went stiff. I was wearing a red jacket. In fact, I was one of the only people there who was even wearing red. I looked around frantically, but it was useless. The place was crowded, filled with people laughing and drinking, but no one was looking at me. At least, not obviously. I showed Lena the message, and she said we should leave. The two of us started making our way back to the Airbnb as cautiously as possible. I kept glancing around behind us to make sure we weren't being followed, and we weren't. By the time we got inside, I bolted the door and double-checked every lock. We shut the curtains and locked all the windows too, trying to convince ourselves we were just overreacting. But an hour after we got back to the Airbnb, we started getting hungry, but neither of us wanted to leave. We ordered Uber Eats instead, picking some random burger place a few blocks away. I always had my Uber Eats setting set to leave at door by default, as I had a really bad experience with a delivery driver a while back that I don't want to talk about. The estimated wait time was 50 minutes, which felt like forever. We distracted ourselves by watching some dumb reality show, trying to shake off the lingering paranoia from earlier. For a little while, it worked. Eventually, there was a knock at the door. I looked down at my phone and saw a notification from Uber Eats saying the driver was arriving. I was confused though. Normally, Uber Eats would send a photo when the food was dropped off, so I wasn't too sure why our driver had knocked on the door. I looked at Lena, and she looked equally confused. I got up and checked the peephole, and yeah, it was a random, bulky-looking dude in a hoodie holding our bag of food. He just looked like a normal Uber Eats driver. I watched for a few moments, expecting him to set our food down and leave, but he just stood there. After a while, he knocked on the door again and said out loud, "Uber Eats for Anna." I said thank you and that he could just leave it out there, but he still didn't move. There was a long pause, and then he finally said I needed to come out and sign something real quick. That wasn't right. I exchanged a knowing glance with Lena. Something was very wrong about this. She immediately pulled out her phone and dialed 911, mouthing, "just in case," to me. I wasn't gonna argue. Looking back, speaking out loud to that guy probably wasn't a smart choice, because after that, he started knocking on the door more aggressively. He kept saying that he had other deliveries to make and that he just needed a quick signature, but I knew that was BS. When I didn't respond, he started jiggling the doorknob. When it didn't budge, he started banging on the door, shouting my name. I honestly thought he was going to kick the door down, and I don't think Lena and I would have been able to fend him off had he done so. But then I heard a siren in the distance, and the banging on the door stopped. I heard the bag of food fall to the porch, followed by rapid footsteps running away from the house. There was quite the commotion on our yard. We heard officers yelling and sirens blaring. Lena and I rushed to one of the windows just in time to see two officers tackling that guy in the hoodie a few houses over. We didn't dare go outside, but we watched as they put him in cuffs and escorted him to the back of one of their cars. The officers then came to our house and we told them everything, including the text I had been receiving. By some miracle, one of the officers had been patrolling just 2 blocks from our Airbnb when Lena placed the call, which explained how they showed up so quickly. Thankfully, we were in a very happening area. They took our statements and told us we'd be hearing from them soon. It turned out our cafe theory was spot on. He worked there. He had taken photos of the giveaway forms and had been following us since that afternoon, probably because we had written down that we were just visiting for spring break, and that made us easy targets or something. The cops' running theory was that he had followed us home from the bar and waited outside our house. When the Uber Eats driver pulled up, he must have convinced him to hand over the food, maybe pretending to be my boyfriend or something. The guy also apparently had a criminal record, which made the situation even worse. We were dealing with someone with a very violent history, and that was downright terrifying. The rest of the trip kind of sucked, and when it got time to leave Charleston, I was relieved. I still don't know what that guy's plan was. Maybe he thought if we opened the door, he could push his way in and do God knows what. Either way, I tried not to think about what would have happened if Lena hadn't called the police when she did, or even worse, if the police hadn't been able to get there in time. I had spent a few days in Austin visiting friends. I live in Louisiana, so it's sort of an all-day drive. On my last day in Austin, my old friend Tom had commented on my Instagram story asking when I leave, and I said today. He told me he lived an hour outside of Austin, which was actually in the direction home for me. I hadn't seen Tom in years, and it would be nice to catch up. He said I should stop by, and I said sure, why not? I set my GPS for Tom's address, and it said about an hour-and-a-half drive. Tom and I had been friends back in high school, but lost touch after graduation. We followed each other on social media, but hadn't really spoken in years. When I pulled up, I noticed his house was a little old-fashioned. It wasn't run down or anything, just aged. The wooden porch creaked under my steps, and when he opened the door, I caught the scent of old wood and something rustic, like an old cabin in the woods. Tom was of course very welcoming, giving me a big hug and pulling me inside. Some friendships stay just as pure no matter how much time passes. The inside of the house was just as old as the outside. The furniture looked like it had been around since the 70s, and every step I took on the hardwood floors let out a small creak. It felt kind of Texas, I guess. It was kind of charming in a way, like stepping back in time. We sat down in his living room, catching up on life, drinking whiskey. It was like 5 p.m. by this point. One drink turned into two into three, and before I knew it, I was pretty drunk. The warmth of the alcohol made the room feel smaller, cozier, but also heavier. Hours passed like minutes, honestly. We were having such a good time catching up that eventually he dropped the question I knew he'd ask. "Hey man, you got a long drive back. Why don't you crash here for the night?" he offered. I hesitated, but he was right. I wasn't in any shape to be on the road. I said yeah, good idea, and asked if I'd take the couch we were on, and then he said nah, I got a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's better than the couch. That was good enough for me. We ate some Chinese food that we had delivered, and after a while, he led me down a short hallway to the spare bedroom. I didn't pay much attention to the inside of the room because I was hammered. We both were. But I remember the air in the room was still, like the room hadn't been used in a long time. I barely had time to register my surroundings before I collapsed onto the bed, completely exhausted and drunk. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. My mouth was dry, my head was spinning, and the room was dark, except for a little bit of moonlight sneaking in through the blinds. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, on the closet door, there was something hanging. At first, it looked like a long black trench coat on a coat rack, but as my eyes adjusted, the shape of it felt wrong. It had a broad upper portion, almost like shoulders, and the way it hung made it look less like fabric and more like a silhouette. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't remember seeing that when I stumbled into the bed, but I had been drunk. Maybe I just hadn't noticed. I rolled over, trying to ignore it. It was just a coat, nothing more, but I couldn't help myself. I peeked again, still there. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep breath, and forced myself to sleep. I don't know how long I was out there before I woke up again. It wasn't just discomfort that pulled me from sleep. It was sound. A slow, soft creaking, like someone stepping carefully on an old wooden floor. My eyes shot open. The room was dimly lit now, dawn creeping through the blinds. I turned my head toward the corner, and my stomach dropped. The coat was gone. I sat up so fast that my head spun. My body was buzzing with a sickening mix of fear and leftover alcohol. I scanned the room, my heart thudding against my ribs. There was nothing in the corner, just an empty closet door. I threw the covers off and rushed to Tom's room. He was snoring, completely unaware of the panic storming through me. I shook him awake, which took a lot of effort considering he was out from all that alcohol. He finally woke up very confused, rubbing his eyes. "The coat," I said breathlessly. "The one on the coat rack in the spare room." He squinted at me, confused. "What coat?" he said. "The black trench coat, the one that was hanging on the closet door. It looked like a person almost." Tom sat up, looking more awake now. "I don't own a trench coat, man. I don't even have a coat rack in that room," he said. I stared at him, waiting for him to say he was messing with me, that this was some kind of joke, but his expression stayed serious. "Come look," I said. He sighed, but got up and followed me back to the spare bedroom. I pointed to the exact spot. "It was right there," I said. Tom scratched his head. He asked me if I was sure I wasn't just dreaming, but I said I know what I saw. I insisted, with my voice shaking slightly. "I woke up and it was there. Then I woke up again and it was gone," I said. We stood in the room for a few moments, both of us feeling the same eerie silence pressing in on us. Tom finally exhaled and shook his head, agreeing we should check the house just in case. We searched every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no weird coats hanging anywhere, nothing that could explain what I saw. Eventually, Tom tried to convince me that maybe I had been in some kind of half-dream state, seeing things that weren't there. I wanted to believe that, really. I didn't want to think about the alternative. As soon as the sun was fully up, I grabbed my stuff, said goodbye, and hit the road. I almost felt guilty leaving him alone after that. The whole drive back to Louisiana, my mind kept circling back to that moment, waking up to that coat-like figure staring at me from the corner, the way it was just gone in the morning. Maybe Tom played a cruel prank on me, but to this day he's never admitted to anything, so I doubt that. Or maybe, just maybe, there had been someone in that house watching me sleep, and they decided to leave before the morning came. This happened to me when I was 18 years old. I was on a trip with my parents and a friend of mine, whom we can call Anna. This story takes place in Sweden when we were on a road trip. My parents, Anna, and I were going on a domestic trip, and we had an 8-hour drive from home. The plan was to visit a theme park and stay at a campsite, but we hadn't booked one. The day came and we arrived in the city where the theme park was located, but we planned to visit it the next day, so we needed a place to sleep. Since we had brought tents in our car, my dad searched online for a nearby campsite. He found one that seemed good and close by, so he called the campsite. Unfortunately, that day coincided with a big soccer tournament, and the campsite was fully booked. Since we hadn't reserved a spot in advance, there was no space left for us. My dad called around, but we couldn't find any campsites that were reasonably priced and near the theme park. Our only option was to find a camping spot in nature. We set the GPS to the nearest parking area in a forest to avoid parking fines. Eventually, we found a spot in a nature reserve. When we arrived, there were some people around, so we asked if it was okay to set up our tents there and whether it was a good place to stay. A woman who was hiking told us it was a good place to sleep and that there were no parking attendants. Based on that, we decided to sleep in a small, lonely gravel parking lot. We were surrounded by forest, and a 10-minute walk away was a beach. At first, we considered setting up our tents on the beach, but something told me it would be better to camp in the parking lot. As we got out of the car to set up our shelter for the night, I noticed a lone car parked further away in the lot. It looked like it was in bad condition, and there was no one inside. I found it strange because it was already evening, so there were no more people at the beach or hiking in the woods. However, I didn't think too much about it at the time. I helped my parents set up our tents. They were sleeping in one tent, while Anna and I shared the other, with both tents placed close together. After struggling to build them, we finally finished. Anna and I made our tent cozy, watched YouTube, and ate snacks. By this time, it was around 11 p.m. We wanted to sleep at a decent hour so we wouldn't be too tired the next day. After a while, around midnight, we decided to sleep. At this point, my parents were already asleep in their tent. Anna and I were scrolling through TikTok when we suddenly heard a metallic sound from the parking lot. It sounded like a shovel being thrown onto the gravel. We both jumped in fear and asked each other what it could be. Too scared to peek out of the tent window, we chose to stay silent and listen. The sound had come from the same direction as the abandoned car. We then heard what I assumed was a shovel being thrown into the car's trunk, followed by the trunk slamming shut. We sat in silence, our hearts pounding. Then we heard the car speed off as if someone were trying to get away quickly. I texted a friend from a nearby city, telling him where we were staying. He replied, warning me that the beach nearby was known to be dangerous, with organized criminals often engaging in illegal activities there. We had no idea about this before. When I read my friend's message, I felt cold and deeply unsettled. About 10 minutes passed in silence after the car sped away. Anna and I had started to calm down a little, when out of nowhere, we heard the loudest, most blood-curdling scream from a man coming from the woods. We were absolutely horrified. I immediately texted my mom, telling her we just heard a loud scream. When she didn't respond, I called her phone to wake her up. She finally answered and said neither she nor my dad heard anything. She reassured me that it was probably nothing serious, but at that moment, I couldn't think of any normal reason for someone to scream like that. Anna and I crawled under the blankets, terrified, not knowing what was happening. Every minute felt like an hour. Even though it was midnight, we were too scared to sleep. Suddenly, everything became eerily silent. Then, my blood ran cold. I heard footsteps. Someone was walking around our tents, moving stealthily. Anna and I sat up, frozen in fear. I put my phone down so that its light wouldn't illuminate the tent. My heart was racing and I could hear my own pulse. There was no logical reason for anyone to be walking around our tents in the middle of the forest at this hour. The footsteps moved around our tent first, then toward my parents' tent, and then circled around our car, which was parked nearby. The person stopped and seemed to be looking at our tents. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, I heard the same car from earlier returning. Its headlights lit up our tents, and Anna and I quickly laid down to avoid being seen. I gathered the courage to peek through the small tent window. I saw the car door slam shut before it sped off again. I felt a brief moment of relief when the person left. From my vantage point, I could see the road they had driven down. 5 minutes later, I saw another car approaching fast. It was a police car, racing in the same direction the other car had gone. Nothing else happened after that. Anna and I were still shaken, so we decided to sit in the locked car to feel safer. I stayed awake until around 5 a.m., keeping watch over the forest, while Anna eventually fell asleep beside me. After about an hour, we went back to our tent, and out of sheer exhaustion, finally fell asleep. We woke up around 9 a.m. completely drained. I told my mom everything that happened, and she revealed that she had also heard the footsteps, but when the person was near their tent, she had also heard heavy breathing, like the kind you hear in horror movies during a scary phone call. She had been terrified too. However, my dad had slept through the whole thing, so we had to tell him the story. Without hesitation, we immediately packed our things and the tents, eager to leave as soon as possible. None of us wanted to stay there any longer. Despite the terrifying night, we had a good time at the theme park later that day. However, that evening, I decided to research the forest where we had camped. What I found made my stomach drop. Just a short time before our visit, a man had been murdered there, stabbed to death due to gang-related debts. Even more disturbingly, 2 men had gone missing from that exact beach and had never been found. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if the person walking around our tents was a dangerous individual, checking to see if there were any witnesses? What if we had been in serious danger without realizing it? Even now, I still think about that night. Who made that horrifying scream, and why was someone using a shovel in the middle of the night in a forest? And the police, what exactly were they chasing? I guess I'll never know. This is a story that still haunts me when I think about it, even though I was so young when it happened. 6 is around the age where a lot of my childhood memories start to become more clear. I have one sibling, my older brother Keith. Keith is 2 years older than me, so at the time he was 8. When I was 6, I had a strict bedtime, 8:30. If I didn't abide by it, or our dad caught either of us up past our bedtime, we'd be in serious trouble. Our dad was always strict with us as kids. Honestly, I don't remember if this happened on a school night or not, but I woke up in the middle of the night to Keith shaking me awake. Keith and I shared a big bedroom upstairs in the house. My parents' room was on the first floor of the house. I was confused why Keith was waking me up, until he told me in a whisper to be quiet and listen, and I did listen, and I heard what he was talking about. It was our mom's voice calling for us downstairs, but it was in a very quiet, whisperish type of voice. I was going to get up to go answer our mom, but my brother told me not to. He said that he didn't think it was Mom. I told him to stop trying to scare me. I remember being so mad at him. He told me to go closer and listen, so I got up and went towards the bedroom door. Right outside of our bedroom door was the little hall that led to the bathroom and another bedroom that our grandma would sleep in whenever she'd sleep over. Directly to the right, when you leave our bedroom, was the stairway downstairs, which had a door as well. I put my ear up on the bedroom door, and I heard the voice clearer. It sounded like our mom's voice, calling our names. Keith, Mikey. I said to Keith, "That's Mom," and he said, "No, it's not." Somehow, as a 6-year-old, and as the little brother, I found myself being the one confident enough to open our bedroom door and then listen through the stairway door. But now, the voice stopped. I whispered to Keith that Mom walked away, and again he said, "That's not Mom." I kept telling him to shut up and that he was scaring me. I unlocked the stairway door and slowly pulled it open to avoid making noise, and when the door was open just enough, I peered through the opening. At the bottom of the stairs was clear as day the silhouette of a person, a woman, but right away I knew it was not our mom. Whoever it was, she saw me because she said, "Hi sweetie, come down." Immediately I shut the door and locked it and went back into our bedroom and locked that door as well. I started to cry, and Keith kept saying, "I told you." We both agreed to start screaming as loud as we could on 3 to wake our parents. So on 3, we started stomping on the floor and screaming as loud as we could. It didn't take long for our parents to barge up the stairs pounding on the locked door. At first, our dad was pissed about the door being locked, but as soon as we let them in, they saw that I had been crying and we were genuinely disturbed about something. They listened to us. My mom was particularly concerned after telling us she was not at the bottom of the stairs and she was not calling our names. She asked what the woman looked like, but all we could say was we couldn't tell. Meanwhile, I remember our dad running downstairs to, I guess, look around for the woman. After a bit, our mom kissed us goodnight again, and I'm pretty sure she told us to lock the doors, which was a first. I was too young to catch on, but it seemed as if our parents knew exactly who it could have been. Keith and I looked out the window when we heard the doorbell after a while, and we saw a police car outside. We wanted to go downstairs, but we stayed put. I remember we begged our parents to tell us who it was and what happened, but our parents would always say they didn't know. They would also say they're proud of us for not going downstairs. Personally, I think they did know who it was, and to save my brother and I from any kind of further trauma or fear, they just never told us, because the last time I saw my parents for dinner, I asked them about it, and they still shrugged it off as some random intruder, but that never explained how that woman knew our names. This happened when I was 16. I was still in high school. I obviously didn't have a car yet, so I was at the mercy of my parents driving me around, or just walking if it was close. It was the weekend. My friend Haley was having some of our friends over since her parents weren't home. My mom drove me to her house. Haley lived close, about a 3-minute drive and 20-minute walk. My mom was single at the time, and she also liked to go out too, so she told me that if she's out late, then to just walk or get a ride home, which meant she was going on a date. A few of our girlfriends were at Haley's house, Tina, Courtney, and Belle. The 5 of us hung out in her backyard for a few hours until some boys from our school unexpectedly showed up. By unexpectedly, I mean Haley didn't tell me she was inviting them. The reason I was annoyed by this was because one of the boys that showed up was a boy I had some annoying history with and didn't really want to see. Haley thought she was being cute and sneaky by inviting him there against my knowledge, because she for some reason wanted him and I to work things out. It was just an awkward mess. There were 4 boys and 5 girls, including me, so eventually, I just decided I wasn't really feeling it. So, after a while, I left. I'm sure after I left that some of the others started to leave shortly after because it was already late, but I just didn't want to be around those boys. I made sure to let Haley know how pissed off I was over texts as I was walking home, and she kept saying, "OMG, come back." She apologized and I forgave her, but I still just wanted to go home. I walked for like 5 minutes until I slowed down. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, and when I slowed down, I confirmed I heard footsteps that weren't mine. I turned around, and there was a middle-aged man with a hood up over his head and his hands in his hoodie pocket. He was smiling, looking at me, and said, "How you doing?" I responded, "Hi," and just turned and kept walking. We were in the suburbs, people are walking around. It's not unheard of, even if it was late. 5 minutes more passed of me walking, and every time I'd glance around, that man would still be behind me, more or less the same distance away, maybe a little closer each time I looked. It was not a straight path home. I'd have to make multiple turns onto intersecting roads to get to my house, and each turn I made, he was still there. I was texting my friends about it, and then the man from behind me said, "Isn't it such a nice night? Love this weather." I replied back, "Yeah," and that was it. I started walking just a bit faster, but not enough to draw suspicion like that I'm running away. The man spoke again, and every time he opened his mouth, part of me died a little more inside. Like, why was he talking to me? Why was he following me? He asked, "Are you from the neighborhood?" I replied, "No." I was making my answer short and firm. The man chuckled. I started asking all my friends for help, to send one of the guys to come pick me up. Ironically, the boy who I was trying to avoid was on his way to come get me. I'll just nickname him Brandon. The man behind me then said something that changed everything. He said, "I'm not gonna hurt ya. You live by the elementary school, right?" I turned around, and he stopped in his tracks. He was still smiling, but now his smile seemed more disingenuous, more sinister. I screamed, "Leave me alone," and started to run. I heard the man running behind me, catching up to me. At that point, it was my life on the line, so I started screaming bloody murder. I started screaming, "Help me," for everyone in their houses to wake up and hear. The man dropped his nice guy facade and said, "Shut up, you little bitch." My screams definitely scared him off because he obviously didn't want a bunch of witnesses about to come out of their houses. He ran away into the darkness, and I saw some lights in the houses around me turn on. One couple came out of their house, and I explained I almost got kidnapped. I stayed there in front of their house until Brandon arrived to pick me up. He drove me home. It was only like a 1-minute drive after that. My mom wasn't home, she was out, and she wasn't answering my texts. I didn't want to be alone, so I invited Brandon in to stay the night. I know he was the happiest camper alive, but it didn't end there. We were up late just talking and reminiscing about old times when we both heard footsteps circling the house. My room in that house was upstairs facing the backyard. We heard the gate to the backyard opening. My mom would never enter through the backyard, so something was off. I held back from yelling out, "Mom," and instead, Brandon and I just looked out the window, watching. We didn't hear any more sounds. We were expecting to see someone walking around the yard, but instead, we both heard a man's voice say, "I see you up there." I let out a very audible gasp and I stepped away from the window. Brandon yelled out something along the lines of, "We're calling the cops, you pussy freak." That's exactly what we did. The fact that this man knew where I lived, he probably knew who I was. What if he knew I was going to Haley's house? Brandon did a lot of the talking on the phone with 911. Looking back, I know he tried really hard to be the man in the situation, and I appreciated that. I was honestly so happy he came inside. The cops showed up, and their presence just made me feel safer. Even just giving them a description of this man made me feel better, like at least something was done. My mom got home soon after, and she was just as freaked out as I was. They kept a police car parked on the block for a few hours as a deterrent, thankfully. From there on, I didn't do any walking at night. I was even scared to go into our backyard after that. My mom had to have our uncle come over and install an entire security camera system. He made no effort in hiding them. They were on full display to deter that creepy man and any other creep from coming to that house. I'm glad to say that the story ended there, because this incident also prompted my mom to sell that house about a year later, just because she hated seeing me living in constant fear in that house. We never found out who that man was.